At 9:55, Ryan stood in the deserted sixth-floor classroom, watching the two boys before him with a mixture of awe and dread. Ron Weasley had just stepped up to the Mirror of Erised, and the instant his reflection appeared, Harry Potter's face went ashen. He lunged forward, trying to shove Ron out of the way, but Ron remained rooted to the spot, as if caught in the mirror's magic. "Ron, move! My parents, they're gone," Harry hissed. Ron didn't seem to hear. His eyes were locked on the glass, and he muttered, "Look, is that really me?" in a trance. Harry's heart sank further when he glanced at the invisible status panel hovering at the edge of his vision. Ron's strength score blinked to 7, a phenomenal rating for an 11-year-old, nearly touching the adult cap of 10. Harry's own strength, by contrast, stubbornly hovered at 4. He'd been at Hogwarts long enough that he expected some improvement, but nothing had changed. Perhaps it was the lack of hard labor. Unlike a house elf, Harry had never hauled sacks of flour or scrubbed floors. Even his time with the Dursleys hadn't fattened him up. Vernon was portly, Dudley notoriously so, and Aunt Marge wasn't exactly slim. Excluding Dudley's later diet, the Dursleys' table was a banquet by any normal wizarding standard, and yet for Harry, it had never been enough to build real strength. Judging by how much Aunt Petunia's been eating, Harry thought her appetite must be enormous. She practically inhales every meal, and then some. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Harry was gasping for breath when Ron finally shook off his daze. He shrugged off the quilt, struck a few over-the-top handsome poses, even spun around theatrically as if auditioning for the cover of a magazine. "Did you see anyone else in your reflection?" Harry asked, trying not to laugh. "No, just me," Ron said, though his voice held an odd pride. "But it's different. I look older, like I'm president of the boys' student council or something." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to tame a few stray strands. He even went so far as to bring his fingers to his scalp, caught himself, and then scowled as if Harry's presence had shattered his courage. Harry blinked. "Wait, what?" Ron beamed and tapped at his chest. "I'm wearing Bill's old prefect badge. I've got the House Cup and the Quidditch Cup in my arms." He swept his hands around in an imaginary arc. "And I'm the captain of the Quidditch team." He spun back to face Harry. "Do you think this mirror is showing us our future? How's that possible?" Harry pulled in a shallow breath. "Everyone in my family is dead." "Let me take another look," Harry muttered, gently trying to edge Ron aside. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "No, that can't be. The resurrection stone?" Before the last two words left his lips, Ryan was on his feet. With a quick flick of his wand, he distorted Harry's whisper into incoherence. Ryan couldn't allow Dumbledore to realize Harry already suspected the existence of the Deathly Hallows. They'd agreed on a strict pact. Any hint of the Hallows or Atlantis had to be scrubbed from conversation before a third party could hear. And right now, Dumbledore was watching them through that enchanted mirror feed, ready to pounce on any slip of the tongue. Ron, for his part, didn't even notice the exchange. His behavior this evening was completely unlike the last time they'd been here. Instead of jostling for the prime spot by the fire, he simply sighed, gave up his chair, and said, "Fine, there's no rush. We've got all night." With that, he found a cozy corner, wrapped himself in a thick quilt, and was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. Ron never seemed to have any trouble dozing off, no matter where he was. Harry watched him drift away, then turned back to the mirror. He leaned forward, fingertips tracing the cool glass as if to coax its secrets out. Hidden behind his calm exterior was a storm of questions. How far could he pry? And would Ryan, or worse, Dumbledore, stop him before he learned the full truth? He steeled himself, determined to uncover every mystery the mirror, and perhaps the Hallows themselves, had to offer. Ryan lingered only a moment after the magic faded, then vanished from sight. Deep in Nottingham Forest, within the stone towers of Smith Castle, Dr. Hamster Flywheel was calmly sipping water from a crystal bowl when Ryan rematerialized just outside the door. At his side stood Jack, the house elf, gently cradling a sleek black cat. Today was the long-awaited ceremony of fledglings. Jack set the cat, named Jerry, upon the floor, and the room's atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Jerry was no ordinary feline. He was the very embodiment of Fiendfire's spirit. Before Ryan had conceived the moon's phantom, he'd entertained a different, far more drastic plan. Upon attaining Fearless Level 7, a threshold that in this world made a wizard godlike, he might have destroyed the Horcruxes outright. But Ryan knew that even the darkest artifacts have a purpose in the tapestry of magic. Eradication felt wasteful, so instead he chose creation. The ancient lore held that only two forces could truly annihilate a Horcrux, the fang of a basilisk and the blaze of fiendfire. Under Ryan's exacting design, a pure black tabby already stricken with a terminal illness became the vessel. Over 10 unbroken hours, Ryan funneled raw concept magics of fiendfire and Horcrux lore into the frail creature. When at last he withdrew his power, the tabby stirred anew. Jerry rose on nimble paws. His fur shimmered with emberglow, his eyes flickered like coals under ash. Insatiable, he would consume any substance, matter or magic, preferring nothing more than the dark, lingering essence of Horcruxes. In temperament and rebirth, he was much like a phoenix, yet his sustenance lay in that very evil he might one day help destroy. Dr. Flywheel set down his bowl and beamed. Jack bowed deeply. The new magical creature flexed, its hunger and potential coiled tightly inside. The ceremony of fledglings was complete. Jerry, spirit of fiendfire, had been born. Without feeding on a wizard's tormented soul or the essence of a Horcrux, the creature couldn't grow any larger than a palm. Today, Ryan set aside his usual methods in favor of a new experiment, one inspired by Dementors. He intended to perform a complex ritual on his pet, Dr. Hamster Flywheel, granting the little fellow the ability to absorb the tangled emotions of wizards. With that power, the hamster would never be plagued by distracting thoughts and could live on indefinitely. After all, the cruelest part of having a pet is enduring the final separation, and Ryan refused to accept that fate now that he had the means to prevent it. That night, Dr. Hamster Flywheel slipped into a deep sleep. In his dreams, brilliant azure runes streamed endlessly from Ryan's wand, each symbol weaving itself into the hamster's subconscious. By morning, Ryan was back in the Hogwarts dormitory, but Harry and Ron still hadn't returned. He opened the door to find Harry sprawled across his bed, fast asleep after hours of heavy thinking. In contrast, Ron looked as though he had only just woken. He was posing in front of the mirror of Heir, his fiery red hair catching the light like flickering embers. It wasn't until nearly 10 o'clock that Harry finally stirred. He and Ron hurriedly packed their things, pretending they had only just finished breakfast in the Great Hall, and headed down to the common room. There wasn't a soul around, and Harry found himself oddly untethered. He didn't even know what guise to adopt. Moments later, he was back in the Gryffindor common room, nestled in an armchair by the fire alongside Ron. They nibbled on crusty loaves, flatbreads, and mushrooms speared on a roasting fork as they chatted. "Fancy a game of wizard's chess?" Ron offered, leaning forward. "Or we could go down to visit Hagrid," Harry countered. Ron frowned. "I know what you're really thinking, Harry. You want to go back to that mirror, but please, not tonight." He asked 3 times in quick succession, each time prompting Harry's reluctant no. Remarkably, Ron now seemed as calm as if the mirror of Heir had never occupied Harry's every waking thought. Harry sighed. "Why not?" Ron settled deeper into his chair. "Honestly, my neck is killing me from sleeping on the hard floor. I need a proper bed." "Come on," Harry urged. "We can be in and out before dawn. It's the 3rd night. Filch and Snape won't be guarding the door again." Harry shook his head. "We left no trace yesterday." But Ron wouldn't be swayed. "I still think it's too dangerous, and my back can't take another night like that. I'm not going tonight. Maybe tomorrow, though. I'll come with you then." With that, he folded his arms, resolute in his refusal. Chapter 162, Dumbledore's Plan. My name is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. To nearly everyone, I am simply Albus Dumbledore. Percival for my father, Wulfric and Brian for distant ancestors. Only my brother Aberforth and one other person in the world know my full name. Most wizards are aware of nothing more than Percival. At last, the boy of prophecy has arrived at Hogwarts. He is kind, pure of heart, and surprisingly sharp. Despite the dark echoes of Tom Riddle in his soul, the Sorting Hat placed him in Ravenclaw rather than Slytherin. A sign, I believe, that I made the right call. Even before I fully understood that he carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul, a living Horcrux, I had resolved that he must grow up under Lily's care. Only her love could nurture the prophecy to its true potential. Thanks to Mrs. Figg's watchful presence, I have learned every detail of Harry's upbringing, yet I have often questioned my own judgment. A darker part of me even relishes the idea that if he falters, the boy's torment could transform him into a powerful, destructive force, an obscurus, born of accumulated negative magic. Now that Harry is here, every strand of my plan begins to fall into place. The question that haunts me is whether this carefully laid strategy will bring about the prophecy's promise of salvation or unleash a calamity beyond reckoning. Only time will tell. I learned early on that Harry, safeguarded by Lily's sacrificial spell, could never become an obscurus. Instead, his power would only grow. That alone would mark him as the true child of prophecy. Yet I knew that if I failed to guide him safely, I myself would have to face Tom Riddle in battle. At first, I tried to convince myself that adopting Harry would protect him, and perhaps protect the world. But then came the shattering truth. Harry was a Horcrux. By a miracle of Lily's enchantment, the fragment of Voldemort's soul had been absorbed into Harry and purified. But that meant destroying Harry was the surest way to destroy Voldemort. I was paralyzed by indecision and ultimately abandoned the idea of adoption. Outwardly, many wise witches and wizards hail me as selfless and brilliant, yet I know better. I am no hero. I have failed time and again to nurture a healthy, happy soul, and the moment I discovered Harry's hidden piece of Voldemort, I felt the unconscionable urge to end the boy's life. If he had come to live with me, could I have resisted? I am no noble figure. I recoil from power, and even more, from the innocent child I was meant to protect. I still shudder when I think of who I was back then, convinced that if I could gather all 3 Deathly Hallows, I'd be invincible. I chased impossible dreams of ultimate power, blinded to the harm I was causing. Harry has just enrolled at Hogwarts, Ravenclaw, of all houses, alongside 2 other Peveril descendants, Ryan and Neville. All 3 are spoken of in the prophecy. Harry remains the marked one, bearing the scar Tom Riddle himself left on him. Yet the more I study it, the more I realize the prophecy doesn't strictly name him as the sole chosen one. The thought flits through my mind. If Harry's role is not as indispensable as I once believed, could it be me instead? A selfish, revolting notion, but there it is. Even Dudley has become a wizard. Petunia's long-suppressed wish has unexpectedly come true, and while part of me is glad for her, I can't ignore the darker consequences. In favoring Harry, my grand plan for the greater good, I've inadvertently exposed the Dursleys to danger. Petunia, Dudley, even their dear Aunt Marge, they've all paid a price because I insisted on rewriting fate. How noble could that be, if it brought suffering in its wake? I've hardly changed at all, it seems. Worse still, I've uncovered whispers of a dark wizard maneuvering in the shadows, intent on striking at Harry. And, as if that weren't enough, Tom Riddle himself has returned to Hogwarts, this time tethered to the back of Professor Quirrell's head. Does he nurse an old grudge against me for refusing him the defense aga inst the dark arts post all those years ago? Quirrell has always seemed unnervingly eager, standing just out of reach, as though he'd like nothing better than to prove my misjudgment. I must steady myself. The stakes are higher than ever, and I've no excuse for letting my own failings cloud my judgment. Hogwarts needs me clear-headed and fast. He had no idea that unless he explicitly acknowledged Tom's existence, or flatly denied it, I would have no way to separate Tom from him without risking Quirrell's life. Even when Harry's love spell felled him twice, he could have come to me afterward, and we could have worked out a solution. Instead, he refused and deliberately avoided me. Desire is one of the hardest things for any of us to shake, myself included, and Quirrell most of all. That's why I used Sir Nicholas's enchanted stone as bait. I knew Tom's curiosity would draw him in. I chose this particular year for 2 reasons. First, Sir Nicholas has lingered long enough that his magic still holds power but is reaching its limit, perfect timing. Second, I needed to pull Riddle out of the Albanian forest to discover one crucial fact. Does he know that Harry himself is a Horcrux? That knowledge is the linchpin of my entire plan to save Harry's life. Yet something unexpected happened. Quirrell, Tom, has never attempted to harm Harry. That restraint runs so contrary to everything I know of Voldemort's ruthless nature that it can only mean one thing. Tom suspects something about Harry's true identity. And if he does, then every step I've taken up to now has led me straight into exactly the right place. Lucius's recent visit confirmed my worst fears. Tom Riddle doesn't care about his Horcruxes, and he's made more than one. Harry can no longer be left in peace. If I want to keep him alive, I must act. Thankfully, I'm not short on ideas. Already, Harry has heard rumors of the Philosopher's Stone, and that it's hidden in the restricted wing on the 4th floor. Even more troubling, Mundungus's network reports that Professor Quirrell has been buying dragon eggs and carefully masking his identity. Of course, Tom still remembers Hagrid's obsession with magical creatures, and with Rubus's naivete, it's only a matter of time before Riddle uncovers the secret of the three-headed dog, Luway. My plan is straightforward. Engineer a chance encounter between Tom and Harry and see exactly what Riddle has learned. At Hogwarts, Tom plays it safe. He never slips up except in the Forbidden Forest. Curiously, though, potion ingredients have dropped so drastically in price that Quirrell hasn't ventured into the forest, even with Christmas approaching. That, too, may prove useful. I decided to withhold Professor Quirrell's salary for the next few weeks, promising to pay him later once he'd been arrested. That way, the money stays in our coffers until we no longer need it. To justify the delay, I'll claim Dudley smashed a broom during flying class and that Quirrell must order new equipment. At the same time, I'll enlist Minister Fudge's assistance. I'll ask him to audit our potion supplies, questioning both price and quantity, and suggest that Master Severus suspects the quality of those bargain basement brews. Framed this way, Quirrell will have no choice but to venture into the Forbidden Forest to gather fresh ingredients. The only remaining hurdle is ensuring Harry accompanies him and doesn't blow their cover. To that end, I returned the invisibility cloak to Harry, encouraging him to practice careful late-night outings. While I was at it, I let him study the Mirror of Erised, curious to see what his truest wishes might be. Everything has unfolded exactly as I planned. No sooner had Harry reclaimed the cloak than he slipped away into the castle grounds under cover of darkness. He found his way to the mirror without trouble. Yet as I watched him peer into its depths, something unexpected happened. I felt my own resolve begin to soften at the sight of his pure, untainted longing. Is this really the sort of pretext I want to use to let Harry slip away into the Forbidden Forest? No, it won't do. Sooner or later, Hagrid's dragon egg will draw Harry's attention, and with Harry's loyal heart, he'll race to help his friend. That's when the whole affair will erupt. Better, then, to delay the inevitable. Let him have a little more time to savor the echoes of his family. Late that night, Albus Dumbledore stood quietly behind his son, cloaked in shadow. Through the glass of the Mirror of Erised, he watched Harry gaze in rapture at the fleeting images of his parents. For a moment, father and son were united in their longing, one living the memory, the other protecting the boy who carried it. Dumbledore pressed a gentle hand to the mirror's cool surface and whispered, "Not yet, Harry, a little longer." Then he slipped away, leaving Harry to his dreams. Chapter 163, Death. It was the third night after Christmas, and Harry Potter sat cross-legged on the dusty floor of the abandoned 6th-floor classroom, staring into the cracked surface of the old mirror. He had hardly dared to breathe. "Back again, Harry?" A familiar voice broke the silence. Albus Dumbledore emerged from the shadows, his eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. He gave a soft sigh. Harry jumped to his feet so suddenly that his hair stood on end, so startling that somewhere down in the Gryffindor dorm, Ryan lifted his head, convinced he'd never seen a person's hair do such a thing. Harry cleared his throat. "I didn't see you there, Professor," he stammered. Dumbledore smiled. "Funny," he said. "You've never seemed short-sighted to me, especially when you're invisible." Harry noticed the gentle ease in Dumbledore's tone and felt his pounding heart slow. His hair settled back down, and the goosebumps along his arms melted away. He turned back to the mirror. This magic mirror, can it show the future? For a moment, he said nothing else, lost in the gleaming depths of the glass. Then, with sudden excitement, he blurted out, "I resurrected my family." His chest heaved as if he'd just run a race. Dumbledore regarded him thoughtfully. Harry's pulse raced. He knew the resurrection stone existed, and he wondered if this mirror was somehow linked to it. Swallowing hard, he pressed on. "Tell me, Professor, if this mirror can grant visions of tomorrow, Then what is my truest desire? Dumbledore fixed Harry with a calm, steady gaze. Harry, what's lost cannot be restored. He spoke softly, but each word carried the weight of ages. Beautiful flowers will bloom, but one day they will wither. Every creature in this world is only passing through, a traveler for a moment. Harry's chest tightened at the words. Dumbledore continued, Don't weep for your dead relatives. One day we will all join them. Death is merely another grand adventure. A sharp edge cut into Harry's reply. Those sound like cowards' excuses, he snapped. Magic is a miracle, a power that lets us rewrite the rules of the world. For an instant, he forgot who he spoke to. All he felt was the sting of denial, as though Dumbledore wanted him to accept the unbearable fact that his family was gone forever. Dumbledore's voice remained gentle. Death is not the end of everything. It is simply transformation. He paused, choosing his next words with care. Consider this. Flowers bloom and then they wither. Stars twinkle before fading into darkness. One day, even the Earth, the Sun, the Milky Way, and this vast universe will cease to exist. In the face of such cosmic impermanence, a single human life is as brief as a spark against the night sky. In that fleeting instant we are born, we laugh, we cry, we fight, we're wounded and healed, we hate and we love. All of it, joy, sorrow, anger, affection, is a momentary encounter in the grand tapestry of existence. Harry stared at him, the turmoil in his heart mirrored only by the glittering eyes behind Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles. Silence settled between them like dew at dawn, each pondering the fragile beauty of a life that must one day end. Albus Dumbledore's voice echoed with a strange finality. I will embrace the eternal sleep of death. At that moment, Ryan froze. In Dumbledore's outstretched hand, the Elder Wand began to glow with a silvery light, so subtle that no ordinary witch or wizard could perceive it. Yet Ryan felt it deep in his bones, a vast, inexorable will pressing in on them both, as if the very god of death had claimed this hour. Strangest of all, Dumbledore himself gave no sign of noticing. Ryan realized with a chill that this was the hidden truth behind Nicholas Flamel's acceptance of mortality and the reason the stone had fallen silent. The Philosopher's Stone was not merely an alchemical aid or a way to freeze time upon its bearer, nor was it the half-baked notion of endless life while growing frail, as some Muggle fanfiction might suggest. It was something far more profound. In the lore of real alchemy and the legends of epic fantasy, the stone functioned like the mythical elixir of life, a vessel for a wizard's very soul. Any witch or wizard in possession of the stone became literally indestructible and could fashion immortal artifacts at will. More astonishing still, the elixir it produced didn't just halt aging, it restored the drinker to vibrant youth, guaranteeing unending vitality. This was the apex of immortality. There would be no withering bones or dimming power, no creeping ennui or dull despair. The idea that infinite life must inevitably bore its guardian was, Ryan now saw, pure nonsense. The true magic of the stone lay not in prolonging days at the cost of wonder, but in granting life's fullest brilliance, eternally renewed. The world is moving forward at an astonishing pace, so much so that it seems absurd to cling to tired old notions about life's meaning. To lament immortality as a curse, to claim that endless existence brings only suffering, is nothing more than sour grapes. After all, true immortality would encompass every conceivable desire. Nothing would lie beyond its reach. Well then, what exactly does this mirror do? Harry asked, shaking off his doubts. He realized that, despite all the speculation, it probably couldn't foretell the future. Something about Dumbledore's earlier explanation hadn't sat right with him, so he decided to start again from the top. Albus, Harry said, there's an inscription at the top of the mirror. Let me see it. Dumbledore peered at the glass as though waking from a dream. Harry leaned in and read the strange jumble of letters. Eris edes ro ru wot ek afer uoi ton wos I. That makes no sense, Harry muttered. Try reading it backwards, Dumbledore suggested softly. Harry rearranged the phrase. Bit by bit, the gibberish resolved itself into a clear sentence. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. Dumbledore nodded. Indeed, this is the mirror of Erised. Erised being desire spelled backward. It doesn't reveal your reflection. It reveals your deepest cravings. Harry stared into the shining surface, the puzzle of the mirror suddenly falling into place. Harry stared at the old mirror in Dumbledore's office, confusion writ plain on his face. I think I understand its magic power now, Dumbledore said gently. It shows you your innermost desires. Harry nodded. It let me see my family. And it let your friend Ron see himself as head boy, Dumbledore added with a playful sparkle in his eyes. How did you? Harry began, only to have Dumbledore finish for him. You don't need an invisibility cloak to be invisible, Harry, the headmaster replied with a small, knowing smile. At the corners of his mouth, the slightest grin appeared, as though he'd been expecting this question all along. Harry frowned. Sir, you weren't here last night, but you saw everything through this mirror? Dumbledore rubbed his aching knees. You and Ron stayed up here the entire night, and I've been paying for it ever since. He shifted in the high-backed chair behind his desk. Cost me quite a bit of sleep. Harry flushed. So you really just stood here the whole time, keeping us company? Not exactly. Dumbledore leaned forward, steepling his hands. I was watching, yes, but I also learned something important. Harry, you need to understand that this mirror of Erised neither teaches us facts nor uncovers any ultimate truth. It shows only illusions, reflections of what we most long for. Harry's eyes flicked back to the mirror, its surface dark and inscrutable. If Ron truly has the makings of a great leader, he must spend his time learning and growing, not chasing dreams of future glory. If he lingers here chasing shadows, that real potential will slip through his fingers. Dumbledore paused. And you too, Harry. Your desire to see your family again is perfectly natural. But you have a life here at Hogwarts, friends who care for you, challenges to face, and your own path to forge. Don't let the mirror waste your time. Harry's heart tightened. He glanced one last time at the glass, then turned away. Dumbledore's words sank in. Some things were only meant to be glimpsed, not pursued. Closing his eyes, Harry let the mirror's hazy image fade, and stepped back into the reality that awaited him. Harry sat up in bed, tugging the blankets around him as Professor Dumbledore settled on the edge of his mattress. The glow from Dumbledore's wand cast soft shadows across the room, and Harry braced himself for another lesson in wisdom. Harry, Dumbledore began gently, it's admirable to hold on to your dreams, but at some point, a stubborn dream can become not just useless, but dangerous. When you fixate on something that can never be, or must never be, you squander your life chasing a phantom. You've lost your family, and I won't pretend that isn't heartbreaking, but continually gazing at something you cannot have will only deepen your sorrow. The headmaster paused, his gaze distant for a moment. Tomorrow we'll move the Mirror of Erised to a new location. I ask that you not seek it out again. If you happen upon it by accident, steel yourself against temptation. Indulging in illusions and forgetting real life will get you nowhere. Now, why don your marvelous invisibility cloak and get some rest? Harry hesitated, curiosity warring with Dumbledore's warning. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, may I ask you something? Of course, Dumbledore replied with a kindly smile. You've already asked one question today, but feel free to ask another. Harry drew in a steadying breath. His green eyes reflected the torchlight as he looked up at the headmaster. What did you see when you looked into the Mirror of Erised? Harry blinked and found himself staring down at a pair of thick woolen socks in his own hands. Really, there's no such thing as too many socks, Dumbledore said with a soft chuckle, stepping into view. Christmas has come and gone, and not one person thought to send me a pair. They all insisted on giving me books instead. Harry's eyes went wide. Chapter 164, The Reserve Savior. Ryan lay on his four-poster bed in the Ravenclaw dormitory, wide awake long after his roommates had fallen asleep. What Dumbledore had confessed under the sway of the Death God's will kept spinning in his mind. This deity, or perhaps one of its ancestors, was nothing like the cold, superior force he'd first imagined. He didn't see himself as the master of life and death, above nature's laws. Instead, he regarded death as an essential part of the world, an inevitable destiny for all living things. Everything that is born must one day return to dust. In that moment, Ryan understood why Dumbledore had embraced love so fiercely, and why he broke through the sixth circle of magic. The death god who had whispered into Dumbledore's ear did not claim immortality. He knew he, too, would die. Only such a being, one who recognizes the value of every heartbeat, could awaken the deep power of love in a wizard like Dumbledore. Had the Death God truly thought himself invincible, Dumbledore's heart would never have opened, and he would have resisted the influence altogether. The revelation both comforted and unsettled Ryan. On the one hand, it meant this Death God was not some tyrant bent on snuffing out life for sport. On the other, it hinted at depths and secrets still hidden, truths that could reshape everything Ryan thought he knew about magic, mortality, and the thin line between them. He sat up, determination hardening in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it armed with this new understanding. For if death was a natural end rather than a punishment, then love, stronger than any curse, might just be the true power that saves us all. Only if this God truly embraces the fundamental fantasy novel principle that knowledge and action must be one, can he hope to sway Dumbledore, or even Nicholas Flamel, who has long walked the path to immortality. That deity can only be Ignotus Peverell, the youngest of the three brothers in the old legend. Antioch Peverell, the eldest, forged the Rod of Destiny, also called the Death Rod, or later the Elder Wand, as his means of claiming the title God of Death. Above all else, Antioch revered power. His wand embodies that very obsession, granting a kind of immortality, passing only to the strongest, its allegiance sealed in blood. Were he ever to ascend fully as the God of Death, he would hold that throne forever, eternally pursuing unending life. Cadmus Peverell, the second brother, created the Resurrection Stone to seize the same dark mantle. Even more arrogant than Antioch, Cadmus viewed himself a ruler above natural law, determined to summon the dead back into life. His stone mirrors that hubris, calling shades from the beyond, inverting the balance of life and death in an audacious bid to transcend mortality. If one truly claims the mantle of death, the ancient arts of resurrection may once again flow back into the world. Of the three Peverell brothers, it was the youngest, Ignotus, who proved most worthy. Modest by nature, he understood that all life must return to death, and when his time came, he would meet it without fear. To seal his inheritance, Ignotus fashioned the invisibility cloak, both a symbol and a tool. While he wore it, he stood beyond the reach of death, but the instant he set it aside, he would become mortal once more. In many ways, the cloak was more than a garment. It was the very embodiment of the office he was destined to hold. Indeed, I suspect even the title Death itself was simply another cloak to him, one he donned to guide departed souls. Once Ignotus took up that role, the great wizards of old, beings who had wielded power like gods, slowly faded from the world. Even Nicolai, who had long sought immortality, found himself drawn by Ignotus's example to lay down his magical burdens and embrace the rest beyond life. Viewed in this light, the legend of the three brothers becomes less a bedtime fable and more a contest for the cosmic office of death. The eldest sought power through force, the middle brother craved unrivaled strength. But it was Ignotus's humility that won the day. He inherited the position of death, becoming the custodian of the afterlife. It was a natural choice. A being prepared to relinquish all power would surely entrust it to one whose heart and purpose mirrored his own. At first, Death was captivated by the eldest Peverell brother, but in time he grew weary, not only of that brother, but of his own mantle as Lord of the Grave. He turned instead to the third brother, whose character most closely resembled his own. In the original legend, it is this youngest Peverell who shapes the afterlife into a realm of freedom. It is a paradise of sorts. Gentle, wholesome souls receive whatever they desire, while those who are incomplete or wicked lie wailing in helpless despair. Wizards, however, may refuse even this liberty. By clinging to their footprints in the world of the living, they can choose to remain as ghosts rather than pass on. And it was Death himself who laid down a final decree among the Peverells. No brother was ever to kill another. For in his eyes, mortals belong to the earth, gods to their own sphere of power. Over the generations, Death's own family dwindled until there was no son left to carry the Peverell name. His eldest granddaughter instead wed a potter who possessed an invisibility cloak. Now, as the strands of fate have woven anew, Death has left fresh signs. Harry Potter bears echoes of both Peverell brothers. At last, speaking through Albus Dumbledore's fallen form, Death delivers one final warning to his descendants. Harry's spoken words weren't entirely his own. Unbeknownst to him, Ryan had embedded subtle traces in Harry's body and mind, like hidden markers that gently steered Harry's thoughts and made him voice what Ryan intended. It was a sly, almost ghostly form of mind control. Harry felt the words welling up from within, yet they weren't truly his. What lay behind Ryan's fascination was a deep dive into the ancient Peverell legacy, specifically the deeds of Ignotus Peverell. Legend held that Ignotus had been generous to ordinary witches, wizards, and even muggles. Yet he was ruthless toward any witch or wizard who threatened to ascend to what was known as Level 7, the exalted realm of the spirit wizards. Long ago, before the Great Peverell Schism, the Longbottom and Smith families boasted direct descent from those earliest spirit wizards. Their household ethos prized raw power above all else, and it seemed inevitable that someone, if not several, among them would brush against the 7th level. But every time one of their ancestors approached that pinnacle of magic, Ignotus's mysterious law ripped them offline, banishing them to a sort of afterlife. Gripped by this curse of enforced departure, the Longbottom line fell into mediocrity, while the Smiths renounced magic altogether. Over the generations, even the most precious tomes of arcane wisdom vanished from their libraries. Not a single book of enlightenment remained. The last devotee of the Smiths hid in the shadows, turning to secretive alchemy rather than the grand sorceries of old, and the decline did not stop there. Later branches of Peverell blood, families like Slytherin and Gaunt, found their own magical strength steadily ebbing, as if Ignotus's invisible hand had been sweeping away every prodigious talent. Perhaps, in his stern view, the mortal realm could not bear beings of such transcendent power. Any wizard who grew too formidable was summoned to ascend, stripped of their mortal coil and consigned to the afterlife. This hidden decree was the unseen force that had shadowed Ryan's work all along. No wonder he'd felt watched, as though some ancient power monitored every bold experiment. If only he had uncovered the truth about Ignotus Peverell sooner, he might have realized why his greatest ambitions kept slipping through his fingers. He could do nothing but die young and return to join his ancestors. From a purely wizarding perspective, his deeds were just, but they thwarted Ryan's plans and earned his enmity. And the prophecy only deepened the mystery. Why did the second son's most gifted heir, conceived under the influence of an aphrodisiac, grow up incapable of love and turn into a villain? Why, instead, was the role of savior destined for the third son, whose lineage would not only endure but multiply? Perhaps in the divine scheme, the proud, conservative line of the second brother had no place in the world he governed and was meant to be recalled to the afterlife for re-education. Thus the Gaunt line was extinguished. The eldest brother's descendants, having atoned for their ancestors' errors, would be offered the mantle of savior, but only after the inheritance of their own blood was honored first. And then there's Ignotus Peverell. To any wizard who meddles with gods or seeks true immortality, he is the greatest threat. He unites knowledge and action in perfect harmony, guided unwaveringly by his own heart, a peril all the more fearsome in those who have reached the 7th level of mastery. In the chronicles of magic, every wizard who once attained godlike renown and then mysteriously vanished escaped the clutches of that fearsome entity known only as death. In reality, the celebrated title of Savior of the World was nothing more than a gauntlet thrown by death itself, a test to find its successor. The rules were simple, yet cruel. A would-be savior must gather all 3 Deathly Hallows, willingly relinquish them at the end of the trial, and then offer up their own life. Only by dying in this selfless way could one rise as the new god of death. Ignotus Peverell, the last to hold that grim office, had grown weary of its burdens. He longed to lay aside his invisibility cloak and surrender his mantle forever, but the prophecy had other names in mind. Neville Longbottom and a young man named Ryan, neither marked as Horcrux nor blessed by any bond with Voldemort, were designated as runners-up. They had virtually no hope of finding all 3 Hallows, and even if they never met death's demand, they lacked Harry's uncanny safeguard against final sacrifice. Ryan, who had already tasted the twists of time travel, understood all too well that this race would be as exhausting and tangled as any he'd run before. He paused for a moment, reflecting on how fate had intertwined their lives once more. It struck him then. No matter the world or the era, human relationships were inescapable. Bonds of loyalty, rivalry, friendship, and love were woven into every quest, every sacrifice, and every step they would take toward their uncertain destiny. Chapter 165. The Wizard's Strange Passive. 11 o'clock in the evening, and Harry slipped back into the Ravenclaw dormitory so suddenly that Ron, lost in his own thoughts, snapped back to reality. "Harry, why did you come running back? Did Filch spot you, or Professor Snape?" Ron bolted upright in bed. Harry grumbled as he peeled off the invisibility cloak. "Are you so sure I got caught?" "How many points did they dock us this time?" Ron asked, swinging his legs off the mattress and draping himself over Harry's back, Scabbers squeaking protestingly in his arms. Harry gently pried Ron's face away. "No points lost," he said, settling himself on the edge of the bed. He smiled to himself. One of the perks of being a wizard, especially one who cares about cleanliness and possesses strong magical talent, is that your body's subconscious magic takes care of all the little nuisances. Bad breath, blackheads, embarrassing body odor. A wizard's subconscious wards them off automatically. Even though Ron could be a bit dim at times, his inherent magical potential meant he never suffered from any of the usual Muggle complaints. That was why Harry never had to hold his breath around his best friend, because quite simply, there was nothing to hold. Ryan leaned back in his chair, tracing a finger along the rim of his teacup as he mused over the origins of the slur, mudblood. Everyone assumed the insult sprang purely from old prejudices against Muggle-born witches and wizards, an attempt to brand them dirty and unclean. But the truth, he realized, ran deeper. In the Middle Ages, he thought, magic wasn't yet refined. Many early Muggle-born simply lacked the raw, powerful potential that pureblood families boasted, and they often didn't understand proper wizarding hygiene. No deodorant, no toothpaste, little soap. Their bodies produced strong odors. Large, open pores trapped grime. Blackheads flourished, and bad breath was, frankly, common. That historical context, Ryan reflected, likely gave birth to the word mudblood, not just a jab at ancestry, but a pointed reference to that pervasive uncleanliness. Ironically, however, today's purebloods weren't immune. Think about Slytherin House, he reminded himself. There are pureblood siblings there who resemble medieval estuarine bog trolls, oily hair, stubbly skin, wafts of stale smoke and sweat wherever they go. No wonder Ron insisted on calling half of them trolls. Even their head of house, Professor Snape, perpetually sported greasy locks that looked in dire need of a good shampoo. Yet Ryan knew there was another layer to this stereotype: confidence. A strong magical lineage doesn't guarantee consistent, powerful spell work. A witch or wizard can possess tremendous innate potential and still fumble charm work if they're riddled with self-doubt. Sloppiness in personal care can trace back to a belief that they're unworthy of presenting themselves properly, or to convincing themselves that odors and grime are just normal. When a pureblood or a Muggle-born feels down, their magic falters, he realized. They become careless, not just about appearance, but about everything. In the Muggle world, people chase away depression with exercise, balanced meals, even therapy. Why didn't some witches and wizards adopt the same healthy habits? Perhaps they simply never learned how. Ryan set down his cup with fresh resolve. Knowledge was power, and with it he could challenge old slurs, rewrite prejudices, and show the wizarding world that true cleanliness and true magic began in the mind as much as in one's bloodline. Neglecting one's hygiene as a witch or wizard is almost like casting a permanent curse on yourself. Take Merope Gaunt, Tom Riddle's mother, whose utter disregard for self-care contributed to her tragic demise. A magical upbringing ought to teach you better than that. Wizards who ignore their appearance end up looking no more extraordinary than any Muggle, and they forfeit the subtle benefits of their innate self-cleaning magic. Muggle-born students, in part ecular, often assume that blackheads, acne, and bad breath are simply natural, and in doing so, they negate the very enchantments that keep them fresh. On the flip side, some pureblood families, like the Weasleys, embrace freckles as part of their charm. The takeaway? A positive attitude and good grooming habits will serve you far more reliably than any spell. Back in the real world, barely a second had passed. Everything that just occurred was merely a ripple in Ryan's thoughts. No points lost? Harry, did you at least see the mirror vanish? Ron asked. Harry sighed and collapsed onto the unmade bed without even rinsing his face. No, it was gone too fast. They caught me. Was it another student? Ron pressed. Harry's words trembled in the stillness of the dormitory. It was Professor Dumbledore. He was standing there last night, right beside us the whole time. Fear tightened Harry's voice. Great Merlin's beard, Ron groaned, blinking owlishly in the dim light. I told you we shouldn't have gone, if you'd listened to me. Wouldn't have seen the mirror, you mean? Harry cut him off, pulling the covers up to his chin. Well, I might as well have stayed in bed if I had to miss it. Ron threw a pillow at him. Professor Dumbledore said they're moving the Mirror of Erised tomorrow. That's it, no more peeking. You'll never get another chance. He flung himself back against his mattress, sinking into his quilt with an exasperated sigh. Harry pressed his back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. I don't care about my future, he said quietly, though his disappointment was plain. I just wanted to see more of what I'm doing, what my life might be. His voice cracked. Scabbers, you all right, mate? He added to the rat perched on Ron's pillow. Ron found the little creature and scooped him up, his face scrunching in irritation. Don't worry about Scabbers, he's fine. But you've got it wrong, Harry. It's not your future you saw. It's just your deepest desire. Harry turned over, curious despite himself. Desire? What do you mean? Ron scowled, glaring at the ceiling. You looked into that mirror and you saw yourself holding the Quidditch cup, didn't you? You said you wanted to be captain someday. You think you deserve it more than anyone. Harry's heart thudded. He hadn't meant to voice such a selfish wish, least of all aloud. I didn't say that, he whispered. You mumbled it. Ron sat up and glared at him. I heard you. You reckon you're the new Quidditch star, that you should be leading the team. Well, why not? You've been the star from day one. Must feel good, eh? Harry sat in silence, weighing Ron's words. The room was dark except for a sliver of moonlight through the high window. Somewhere in the castle, owls hooted softly. Harry began, but Ron cut him off. Never mind, Ron muttered, burying his face in his pillow. He yanked it over his head and pulled the curtains tight. I'm going to sleep. Harry stared at the small mound of quilt and pillow that was his best friend, angry, hurt, or maybe just tired, before settling down again. Tomorrow the mirror would be gone, and with it the chance to see what he truly wanted in life. Yet Harry felt something else too, a whisper of warning in Ron's words, a reminder that desire could deceive. As sleep finally claimed him, Harry vowed to remember that lesson, before it was too late. During the rest of the Christmas holidays, Harry could hardly think of anything else but the Mirror of Erised, and every time he did, his longing grew deeper. To make matters worse, Ron had turned into a moody whirlwind, snapping at anyone who crossed his path. Harry tried to distract him with a protracted game of wizard's chess, Ron's favorite, but it only helped for a few moves. Fortunately, a steady supply of chocolate frogs, licorice wands, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, and greasy lounge kebabs did the trick whenever Ron's temper flared, though it threw Harry's study schedule completely off course. He'd planned to spend the break mastering new spells and then set out to find the Resurrection Stone, just as Ryan had described. Instead, he spent his days shuttling back and forth between the kitchens and the Gryffindor common room. It wasn't until the very end of the holiday that Harry stumbled upon a new tactic: comic books, specifically The Adventures of Doraemon. The fresh issues managed to keep Ron happily distracted until he tore through them in record time. He'd read every earlier volume so often that they no longer held his interest. All Harry could do now was hope that the next Doraemon installment would arrive before their morale and their snacks ran out. But this chapter isn't over yet. Turn the page to continue the story. Ryan Skywalker lay sprawled on his bed, idly petting his cats and planning a visit home to see his hamsters. More than anything, he was lost in thought, thanks to the daydream spell the Weasley twins had patented back in Harry's 6th year. With just a flick of magic, Ryan could immerse himself in any fantasy. One moment, he was a knight in gleaming armor, sword in hand, and steed at a gallop. The next, he commanded a starship on an interstellar voyage. Sometimes, he even slipped into Harry Potter's shoes, living out an uncanny one-on-one adventure in the wizarding world. But Christmas was winding down, and the return of his sisters Kate and Penelope, shook Ryan out of his reverie. Their excited chatter and demands for his company left no room for daydreaming. His once carefree days filled up in an instant. Meanwhile, things at Hogwarts were anything but restful. Quidditch practice had intensified to a punishing level. Gryffindor's first match, scheduled for the Saturday after Christmas against Hufflepuff, was already looming. The Ravenclaw-Slytherin game would follow on the second Saturday. Although the team had a little breathing room before their opener, they were dangerously short-handed. Roger was still missing in action, and next year they'd lose Captain Johnny, the keeper, and both lead chasers to graduation. With so much talent about to walk out the door, the pressure was on to win now and secure Gryffindor's place at the top. To ensure Harry was fully prepared, the entire Quidditch squad returned to Hogwarts early and began his training well before the Christmas break ended. Labeled the team's future captain, Harry found himself plunged into an almost unbearable regimen, so relentless that he developed crippling anxiety every time he mounted his broom. The only silver lining emerged in Ron's reaction. After watching Harry struggle to stay upright, Ron quietly abandoned his own hopes of captaining the team. If the job was going to be that grueling, he decided he'd rather leave it to someone else. Chapter 166, After the Changes. Before he knew it, Christmas break was over. Harry had at last escaped the relentless grind of Quidditch practice and settled back into the relative calm, though far from dull, of his Hogwarts studies. Almost immediately, however, he sensed that something in the castle had shifted. Could so much really change in just 2 weeks? First, there was his roommate, Ryan. Ryan had always been effortlessly stylish, but now he never went anywhere without a pair of rough, heavy gloves. They looked wildly out of place, like a blot of ink on a blank sheet of paper. Harry wasn't the only one who noticed odd new habits. Hermione, too, seemed to blush at the slightest thing, though he couldn't imagine why. Then came Professor Quirrell's peculiar new stench. In defense against the dark arts class, Harry detected layers beyond the usual garlic and rotten egg aroma, an unmistakable odor of damp socks left to ferment for days. Quirrell himself was paler than ever, and his stutter had grown almost fluid. And finally, Wednesday's flying lesson. The sleek meteors that every student loved were gone, replaced by the clunky, first-generation Nimbus 1000s. Harry frowned. Had someone in the caretaker's crew mixed up the broom orders? Whatever was going on over the holidays, it was clear that Hogwarts wasn't quite the same. And Harry couldn't help but wonder what other surprises awaited him this term. Professor Hooch surveyed the mess of wood and leather strewn across the training pitch. She tapped her stopwatch against her palm and cleared her throat. "Mr. Dudley, care to explain how your Nimbus 2000 ended up in this state?" Under her expectant gaze, Dudley Dursley said nothing. Instead, he shrugged and looked anywhere but at his ruined broom. Around them, classmates leaned forward, murmuring among themselves. Everyone, Neville, Anthony, Seamus, Dean, seemed oddly sympathetic toward Dudley. Only Harry, Ron, and Hermione remained unconvinced. Harry's own coldness toward his cousin needed no justification. Hermione, absorbed in aerodynamics, barely cared about broom maintenance, and Ron, ever blunt, simply shrugged when pressed. Yet Harry felt a twinge of discomfort at Ron's sudden defense of Dudley. As they filed away from the Quidditch shed, Ron elbowed Harry. "Honestly, mate, I don't think Dudley meant to smash it. He's new to all this. Look at the size of that broom." He panicked. Harry turned on him. "Since when do you defend my cousin?" Ron rolled his eyes. "Since when do you hate your own family? Give the lad a break." Harry said nothing. Neville and Anthony, both unaware of the Dursleys' history, nodded earnestly, waiting for Harry's blessing to join the debate. Harry simply shrugged them off and trudged toward the castle. What bothered him more than Ron's misplaced loyalty was Dudley's behavior. There was no stubborn pride, no mocking smirk, just a sheepish apology when he handed the reconstructed broom back to Madame Hooch, hammering in the last rivets without a single complaint. It was so unlike the spoiled bully Harry remembered. Later that afternoon, as Harry hurried through a crowded corridor, Dudley's voice called after him. Harry paused. Dudley approached, clutching a small, neatly wrapped gift. "Merry Christmas, Harry," he said, cheeks flushed. I saw this over at the Weasleys' place during the holidays. Thought you might like it." Harry opened the package to find a bright red toy racing car, every detail expertly painted. He looked up to meet Dudley's blue eyes, which, in that moment, held something resembling genuine goodwill. All Harry could manage was a tight-lipped, "Thanks." Dudley nodded and turned away. As Harry resumed his walk, the corridors of Hogwarts felt strangely unfamiliar. Everything and everyone was shifting around him. Even his cousin Dudley. He'd thought things through. Knowing that electrical appliances were forbidden at Hogwarts, he'd chosen a self-contained engine for the car. Wind it up, place the little driver on the seat, give it a few twists, and it would dart a good few meters across any flat surface. It was exactly the kind of imaginative gift his uncle and aunt would never give. If Dudley weren't a wizard, if he were still the spoiled Muggle nephew he'd always been, he'd probably receive nothing more than a crumpled 50-pence coin for Christmas. Cheap, thoughtless, tossed into his stocking without a second glance. But this toy racing car? Harry knew Dudley must have scraped together some of his allowance to chip in on it, and that realization stung worse than the coldest December wind. It only fueled Harry's irritation further, and made him all the more determined to master his spells. Meanwhile, Ron seized the car with boyish delight, peering curiously at every screw and piston. On the sidelines, Ryan gave a fond, exasperated sigh. No wonder he was so clearly Arthur Weasley's son. Ron's fascination with Muggle contraptions, even static photographs, mirrored his father's old obsessions exactly. And yet, Harry reminded himself, Mr. Weasley had been lectured more than once by Mrs. Weasley for splurging on such non-magical trinkets. All at once, Harry felt the twin tug of gratitude and frustration. Grateful for a gift so perfectly suited to Hogwarts life, furious that Dudley's meddling had to complicate everything. He slipped the car and its hidden meaning into his trunk, then turned away, ready to dive back into his charms practice. Ron, who had always struggled with low self-confidence and a tendency to bow to authority, especially his mother's, quietly shelved those nagging doubts. Instead, he threw himself into Quidditch and Wizard's chess, both of which promised a steady income and respectable prospects down the road. Meanwhile, Ryan discovered that Jack had already informed the Lord God that their potion-selling channel was about to be shut down. Professor Snape, Hogwarts's potions master and head of Slytherin House, claimed their quick turnaround brews might conceal hidden flaws. Little did he know how many eyes the so-called Horse King had watching him. Furious at Snape's interference, Ryan spent 10 minutes crafting a perfect retaliation. He gathered every photograph of Lily Evans from childhood through her wedding to James Potter, and for added insult, a final image of Snape himself, sporting a princess-cut hairstyle and puffing his cheeks like a clown. Each print was enchanted with an unbreakable charm, then plastered across every wall of Snape's office. There was simply no way for the professor to tear them down. Before long, rumors swirled that Snape had been forced to purchase his own potions again, and had even relocated his office to escape the unsolicited memorabilia. Cornelius Fudge, the same Minister of Magic who had personally ordered the shutdown of Ryan's enchanted broadcast channels, thought he could slip away unnoticed. Late one evening, he tapped his private flu route key to return home. Instead, the spell misfired, and he materialized in the depths of a windswept moor. There, a band of self-styled righteous vigilantes descended upon him, beating him senseless, and through a crude hex, transforming him into a wild dog. For nearly 3 days, the Ministry of Magic staff carried on in stunned silence, remarking, to their surprise, that productivity had never been higher. It wasn't until the third night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, that someone finally noticed the minister's empty chair. A hurried search party found Fudge, gaunt and wild-eyed, scavenging among the brambles. He was human again by dawn, cradled in a damp cloak and confused beyond measure. Meanwhile, other ministry officials who had schemed to capitalize on Ryan's enforced silence found themselves under sudden investigation. Accusations sprang up out of nowhere, careers unraveled, and reputations lay in tatters. None of this was chance. All of it was the work of the oldest Smith, the gray-haired patriarch whose quiet influence had gone unnoticed until now. Smith needed no ally in Ryan to expose Fudge's corruption and dispatch his cronies. All he required was the minister's own arrogance. By the time Fudge was safely ensconced in St. Mungo's, sore embarrassed and mumbling about hex-induced memory lapses, the ripple effects of Smith's gambit were still unfolding. In the dungeons below Hogwarts, Professor Severus Snape hovered over a mysteriously enchanted photograph, striving by incantation and potion to obliterate every trace of James Potter's image. And elsewhere, in a shadowed chamber scented of strange incense, Professor Quirrell bowed before a silent figure. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Master, my salary, it's been cut off. Why would you choose exactly this moment? I just transferred a massive shipment of gold galleons to Monkton's." Quirrell's face drained of color. "Has Dumbledore discovered it?" "Relax," the unseen voice replied. "You must learn how duplicitous our headmaster truly is. He pretends to be frail so that the unscrupulous think they can take liberties with him. This time, the Minister of Magic is merely flexing administrative muscle, testing the boundaries, and I wouldn't be surprised if my untrustworthy servant Lucius is somehow implicated." "Do you really believe Dumbledore hasn't noticed my movements? He's simply chosen to tolerate this, for now, so that he can keep me under his watchful eye. But in doing so, he lacks the resources to monitor everything else, or perhaps he's made an error, an opening the minister seized upon. It's absurd. Magic is power. You can't intimidate a lion with the bleating of sheep." A chill voice echoed through Quirrell's mind, cold, sharp, and entirely separate from his own lips, which didn't move an inch. "Master, those cheap yet reliable potions are no longer available to your humble servant," Quirrell ventured hesitantly. "Have Dumbledore and Fudge conspired together?" he added in a low whisper, only to be cut off by the rasping voice inside his mind. "Nonsense, you fool," it spat. "Dumbledore has no reason to stoop so low. I know him far too well." Unbeknownst to either of them, Albus Dumbledore had in fact used this very question to orchestrate a private meeting between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort. Voldemort, completely unaware that Harry carried a fragment of his own soul as a Horcrux, could not fathom Dumbledore's true intention. His judgment, already clouded by the strain of maintaining too many Horcruxes, blinded him to the headmaster's cunning plan. Chapter 167, The Uncontainable Chi Luo. It was 3 o'clock in the morning in the Defense Against the Dark Arts office on the 4th floor of the castle. Professor Quirrell paced the room, fear tightening his throat as he addressed the presence that haunted him. "Master," he stammered, voice wavering, "perhaps we should slip into the Forbidden Forest and gather rare potion ingredients. My own magical reserves are too weak to impress you." A cold, whispering voice rattled his mind. "Potion ingredients? Do you think you're Professor Snape?" Quirrell's knees buckled. He dared only a whisper. "What about unicorn blood, then?" Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the voice returned, harder than before. "Unicorn blood. Take it. What curse could threaten you once I, your master, have regained full power?" "But it's forbidden. Cursed," Quirrell protested, stumbling over every word. A note of contempt crept into the voice. "Forbidden? Cursed? When I hold the Philosopher's Stone in my hand, whose curses matter? Tell me, Quilinus Quirrell, were your oaths to help me seize the stone all a sham? Do you truly believe I'll fail again, just as that mudblood witch did 10 years ago? You don't really think I'm afraid of Harry Potter, do you?" Quirrell's heart pounded so fiercely he feared it might burst. He dared not answer. In the suffocating silence that followed, he could feel the weight of his master's fury, his own punishment for doubting the power they sought. Quirrell knelt before the Dark Lord, his body racked with silent spasms. He could not utter a sound, and a faint trickle of yellow-stained liquid oozed from the hem of his robe, evidence of the agony Voldemort had just inflicted. The master's cold, rasping voice cut through the hush. "Chi Luo, you will deliver the dragon egg to Rubus Hagrid at the Hog's Head Inn. His routine is simple. Whenever he's free, he drinks there. Do this without fail." A cruel sneer warped Voldemort's lips. "Should you disappoint me, you know what awaits you." Quirrell gasped for air, struggling to find his voice. At last he croaked. "I understand, Master. I will not fail." As though brushing away a common stain, Quirrell produced his wand and swept it over the soiled fabric. The stain vanished, and he folded his hands politely, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. The following morning, Ryan peered at the surveillance feed and nodded in approval. He'd enchanted Quirrell with an undetectable scrying charm and planned to monitor his every move. but he knew he could never slip such spells past Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster's vigilance was legendary. Any lingering enchantment would be uncovered and dispelled in an instant. Now Ryan understood why his own potion shop lay sealed. Dumbledore himself had ordered it shut. And so, though he could watch in real time, Ryan dared not leave any trace of his surveillance unguarded against the headmaster's watchful eye. Dumbledore had almost certainly orchestrated Harry's confrontation with Voldemort to test whether the Dark Lord suspected Harry was his Horcrux. That would also explain why he'd conveniently left the school that day, so Voldemort would have the freedom to make his move. Watching it all unfold, Ryan felt a pang of sympathy for Snape. Had Voldemort's attack landed on a split second later, Snape very well might have been fatally wounded. Back in his study, Dumbledore leaned back in satisfaction. His hunch about the sudden flood of cheap, high-quality potions on the market had paid off in ways he hadn't even anticipated. Clearly, an unknown network of potion makers had been undercutting established suppliers, and by engineering Chilo's death, Dumbledore not only saved Hogwarts a small fortune in staff salaries, but also turned a tidy profit from the unclaimed wages. Meanwhile, Fudge's reputation lay in tatters, and Snape's startled reaction testified to the reach of this mysterious brewing cartel. They wielded real influence both at the Ministry and under the castle's very roofs. Yet despite the shockwaves Dumbledore's plan had sent through the wizarding world, his instincts told him those shadowy figures were driven by profit above all else. For now, they were a threat to the purse strings, not yet to the soul of the magical community. But Dumbledore would be watching every move. Albus Dumbledore sat in his office, poring over the latest correspondence with a heavy heart. Harry had only asked Cornelius Fudge to review the contract, yet Fudge, ever eager for personal gain, had quietly sealed the deal himself, hoping to line his pockets. If monopolizing the lower end of the potion market were really that effortless, Dumbledore wondered, how had that mysterious rival managed to dominate so completely? Clearly, a long tenure at the Ministry had changed Fudge into someone more calculating than the man he once was. The days slipped by, and before anyone noticed, it was Saturday after Christmas. Excitement crackled through the snow-dusted grounds of Hogwarts. Today was the much-anticipated Ravenclaw versus Slytherin Quidditch match. Those who had witnessed the last game, Slytherin versus Gryffindor, still wore anxious expressions. Gryffindor's keeper, Oliver Wood, had been sensational, and the Weasley twins had dazzled as they swooped through the air. Yet none of their heroics could match Slytherin's seeker, seventh-year Terrence Higgins. Higgins played with all the confidence of a seasoned veteran. He was polite, scrupulous, and utterly focused, never once resorting to underhanded tricks. Ravenclaw's Captain Johnny, leaning against the stands, summed it up best. It's not that he can't cheat, he simply has no reason to. When you're chasing the golden snitch, bending the rules doesn't help you catch it any faster. As the players took their positions and the crowd's cheers rose to a crescendo, Dumbledore allowed himself a small, wistful smile. Quidditch had a way of distilling everything down to its purest form: skill, strategy, and a dash of daring. If only the rest of the wizarding world could be so straightforward. Their Slytherin chasers, Marcus Flint, Darian Pusey, and Montaigne, tower over everyone else, like hulking giants on broomsticks. Combined with their brutally physical style, they leave rival players bruised and furious. Even keeper Miles Blige seizes every opportunity to sneak up on opponents, while beaters Derek and Bull wield their bats more as bludgeons than sporting equipment. It's the Slytherin way. Why bother aiming for the quaffle when you can knock your rivals off course instead? Professor McGonagall knows this all too well. In her 7th year, 1953-54, she captained Gryffindor's Quidditch team to what should have been a triumphant victory over Slytherin, only to suffer a concussion and several broken ribs from a deliberate foul. That painful loss fueled her lifelong ambition to see Slytherin utterly defeated on the pitch. Professor McGonagall had never managed to catch every Quidditch match over the past few years, but whenever Slytherin took to the pitch, rain or shine, she made a point of watching. This season, however, Ravenclaw's Captain Roger had withdrawn temporarily, and Johnny, Roger's stand-in, now faced the urgent task of filling gaps in the squad. With 2 beater spots and the keeper's position, currently held by a 7th year in need of reinforcement, he scouted relentlessly for fresh talent. Among the hopefuls was Chu Zhang, a 2nd year whose agility and reflexes made her an excellent seeker candidate, although Harry still outshone her easily in that role. As a chaser, she had skill to burn, but her slight frame worried Johnny for the rigors of high-speed brooms. Beyond Chu Zhang, no other fitting players had emerged. Since Christmas, Johnny and his team had meticulously catalogued every Slytherin player's name, habits, and playing style. Late last night, the dossier was handed off to Harry, each opponent a potential weapon that Harry would have to neutralize if Ravenclaw was to stand a chance. Harry, slender but fearless, was already devising his plan. He'd rely on zigzag dives, rapid climbs, and the old sloth triar, all to throw off any beater's bludger. As soon as the whistle blew, he'd vault skyward, disappear into the clouds, and stay hidden until he'd spotted the golden snitch, then strike. With the rest of the team counting on his cunning, Harry felt a familiar thrill. The match was about to begin. In the locker room, Captain Johnny wrapped up his briefing. On the surface, Harry appeared calm as he listened, but inside his stomach was in knots. He couldn't shake the nagging doubt that he wasn't up to the task. Happy New Year! A special thanks to classmate 28881091348-09414 and classmate 22021-034153657 for their monthly tickets, and to everyone else for your subscriptions and recommendations. Your support means a lot. Chapter 168, The Slytherin Who Attracts Misfortune, Saturday, 11:20 a.m. Ryan sat in the front row of the stands, utterly speechless. He'd hoped to go unnoticed, but since Hermione had invited him, she'd inevitably spotted him. And, as usual, the first-year Ravenclaws all arrived together, so of course Ryan had been dragged along to sit right up front. What he hadn't expected was the arrival of yet another spectator. Excuse me, mind making a bit of room?" A deep voice complained as a broad shoulder nudged past him. Ron, who'd thought he reserved 2 seats for Hagrid, realized with a sinking feeling that it still wasn't enough. Now Ron was wedged next to, of all people, Draco Malfoy. Hagrid ducked down into the gap, his massive telescope bumping against Ryan's shoulder. "I usually watch the matches from me little hut," he said cheerfully, giving the telescope a fond pat. "But there's nothing like the roar of the crowd. I would have come sooner, but by the time I got here, the game was over." "Thanks for being here, Hagrid," Ron murmured, a flush creeping up his cheeks. "And as for Slytherin, well, they're always up to no good. Harry'll win, easy." Hagrid ruffled Ron's hair affectionately. Ron shot Malfoy a glance so full of nervous excitement he nearly tripped over his own words, let alone say anything to the Slytherin. Across the row, Hermione nudged Ryan, whispering, "Can you believe he's actually sitting next to Malfoy?" Ryan managed a shrug. He might have tried to stay under the radar, but in the stands of a Hogwarts Quidditch match, that was easier said than done. As the players roared onto the field and the scoreboards flickered to life, Ryan braced himself. Watching the game in person was one thing, but with Hagrid leaning on one side and Malfoy on the other, this was going to be an experience he'd never forget. That afternoon, the stands around the lake were packed. Although only Ravenclaw and Slytherin were officially scheduled to face off, students from Gryffindor and Hufflepuff flocked over as well, eager for any excuse to watch a match. The moment the Slytherin team took to the pitch, a tidal wave of jeers rose from the other 3 houses, led, of course, by Fred and George Weasley. At the commentary table, Professor McGonagall sat beside Lee Jordan, her sharp gaze sweeping the crowd. She didn't reprimand the twins or quiet the booing. She simply watched them with a barely contained smile tugging at her lips. In her eyes there was a glint of amusement. It was hard not to relish a little house rivalry, especially when Slytherin's name still carried so much, and such dark baggage, years after Voldemort's fall. It reminded her of another time, long before, when Severus Snape had first come under fire. Back in the height of Voldemort's power, Snape exemplified everything people feared about Slytherin. He circulated with the budding Death Eaters, and when one of his cronies played a cruel prank on Lily Evans's friend, Snape did nothing to stop it. In fact, when Lily confronted him afterward, he seemed more concerned with whether she still thought well of James Potter than with the misery he'd allowed. After she answered no, he shrugged and strolled away, never looking back. No wonder the stands had once roared approval when Snape was cornered by the Marauders. Despite the years that have passed and the victories won, some echoes of old mistrust and old vindications never fully fade. It was almost unheard of for Lily to seek out Snape's company, and no wonder. Her reputation was spotless, and anyone who mentioned her did so in glowing terms. By contrast, Sirius Black's habit of stirring up trouble in Slytherin whenever he was in a foul mood somehow struck outsiders as exhilarating. Professor McGonagall, for her part, shook her head at Sirius and his friends, calling them undisciplined, but she still considered them good students at heart. Looking back on my own time-traveling adventures, I count myself fortunate that I never gave in to the temptation of joining Slytherin and playing petty power games. Because, use what I discovered, there was nothing like the noble and aloof house of fanfiction legend. Slytherin House was riddled with scandals, black spots that no amount of bleach could erase. Their real motto wasn't about pure-blood pride or lofty ambition. It was simple pragmatism. Do whatever it takes, so long as you get the result. Even more damning was Professor Snape's blatant favoritism. He doled out extra points to his own housemates at the drop of a hat and devised flimsy pretexts to dock points from anyone in Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, or Ravenclaw. It wasn't just unfair, it undermined the spirit of the entire school. Once I saw that, I knew there was no turning back. Slytherin's brand of success came at too high a price. They didn't so much play Quidditch as they did run roughshod over anyone in their way. In every match, Slytherin exploited loopholes and stretched the rules until they snapped. It was less a game and more a beating, especially for the star players from the other houses, whom they targeted with deliberate ferocity. Their entire roster was built around size and strength. Harry couldn't help but grumble that it was like facing opponents with troll blood. Take Draco Malfoy, for example. In the original timeline, he never would have become Seeker without being handed a Nimbus 2001. It wasn't that Draco lacked talent. His reflexes and aerial sense were solid, but he simply didn't fit Slytherin's idea of the ideal Seeker. Most Seekers were lean and lithe, built for speed and agility. Slytherin, however, prized brute force above all. Draco's pale, delicate features and slight frame were too creamy, as they put it, not menacing enough to strike fear into their rivals. Off the pitch, things were even worse. The current crop of Slytherins made no effort to hide their contempt for Muggle-born witches and wizards. Now that Muggle-borns outnumbered them at Hogwarts, their resentment simmered just under the surface, and sometimes boiled over into open hostility. To make matters worse, many of these students were descendants of Death Eaters. Their families had committed unspeakable atrocities, and although they'd escaped formal punishment, their reputations remained. With so many dark secrets tied to the house, Slytherin's black reputation seemed inevitable. Madame Hooch had given Slytherin one last stern warning: play fair or face the consequences. But the moment her whistle pierced the chilly morning air, it was clear the Slytherins had other plans. From the first second, they surged ahead with ruthless precision, overwhelming the Ravenclaw side. It wasn't that Ravenclaw lacked skill, quite the opposite, but no one could keep pace with the Slytherins' relentless onslaught. High above the pitch, commentator Jordan barely contained his astonishment. Johnny of Ravenclaw snatches the bludger, blindingly quick for a former Seeker. But wait, Derek, Slytherin's beater, swoops in. Did he just... Derek's bat struck the bludger so cleanly it veered away from his teammate and back at Ravenclaw, sending a collective gasp through the crowd. "It's not cheating," Derek shouted back, flashing a cocky grin, "just protecting my own team." Cheers erupted from the Slytherin stands, but they were swiftly drowned out by boos and hisses from Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw alike. Madame Hooch, arms folded and face pinched in disapproval, signaled for play to continue. Whether Derek's tactic violated the rules outright remained murky, but everyone sensed it was dangerously close. Jordan shook his head, indignation flaring. "That was an outrageous foul." "Jordan," Professor McGonagall's low roar cut through his microphone, silencing him instantly. Caught off guard, Jordan stammered, "I mean, that was a public, disgraceful violation." "Jordan, a reminder." McGonagall's voice dripped with warning. This is Hogwarts. Watch your language. The stands fell silent. Even Ryan, Ravenclaw's seeker, who'd been straining his neck toward the golden flash of the snitch, paused mid-hover to glance at McGonagall's steely glare. Then, Madame Hooch's whistle split the tension once more, and the game hurtled forward, more heated, more contentious, and more fiercely contested than any Quidditch match Hogwarts had seen in years. Well, Derek almost took out the Gryffindor chaser, but the match goes on. Lee Jordan's voice rang out, laced with indignation. Today, Harry faced the toughest match of his life, and Jordan's commentary, trained in pre-game practice to focus almost exclusively on chasers, barely even registered what the Seekers were up to. True to the plan they'd devised before the match, Harry had launched himself high into the air the moment play began, hovering and circling like a hunting eagle. The idea was straightforward. Put him out of reach of any early bludger attacks. In theory, it sounded brilliant. He'd have a bird's-eye view of the entire pitch. In practice, however, it was a gamble. Yes, from that height, he might spot the golden snitch sooner, but he'd also be far farther away when it appeared. And if his beaters, charged with both protection and interference, couldn't hold off the opposition, Slytherin's seeker would swoop in for the snitch first. Unfortunately for Ravenclaw, every Slytherin player on the pitch seemed to move like a living bludger, hammering at Dennis and Woody before they could defend their seeker. As a result, Terence Higgins of Slytherin had all the time in the world to scour the skies below, calmly searching for those telltale glints of gold while Harry hovered at a near impossible distance. Chapter 169, Another Victory. The match was in full swing, and Ravenclaw found itself under a relentless barrage of accidental bludger hits. Every time a Gryffindor ringman hoisted his club, a bolt of iron careened toward a Ravenclaw player, always just narrowly off target, but unsettling enough to throw them off their rhythm. Still, they gritted their teeth and pressed on, weaving through Slytherin's defenders to buy Captain Johnny a clean shot at the hoops while keeping Slytherin from adding to their score. High above the pitch, Harry kept his eyes on Slytherin's seeker, Terence. Without warning, Terence dove in a straight-line sprint, surely chasing the golden snitch. Harry kicked his broom into gear, determined to shadow him, but just as he gained on Terence, a bludger smashed past his elbow with brutal precision. "Harry, dodge! Now!" Chaser Henry shouted, hurtling toward him to block the shot. Henry himself was struck mid-charge, sent tumbling off his broom, and slamming his head against the metal hoop below. Reeling, Harry twisted to see whose bludger had just nearly felled him. Slytherin beater Bowl hovered there, club raised in a victory pose. Terence, meanwhile, had come to an abrupt halt, no snitch in sight. The two exchanged crooked grins. It was a setup, deliberate, planned, and ruthlessly executed. "They're cheating!" Ron barked from the stands, leaping to his feet. "Send him off! Ref! Red card!" Even Gryffindor's Dean Thomas got swept up in the moment, yelling about expulsions as though they were playing muggle football. Madame Hooch had heard enough. She brought her silver whistle to her lips and blew sharply, bringing the match to a halt until things could be set right. Roger blew his whistle and gathered the Ravenclaw team around him in midair. "Harry," he said, "you, Johnny, and Phoenix shadow the Slytherin chasers. Don't let them score. Dennis, Woody, you two lock onto their beaters. Keep them busy. Our priority is to disrupt Slytherin's offense and give Harry a clean shot at the snitch. And if anyone attacks Harry, drop everything to protect him." With that, the match resumed. Almost at once, a Slytherin chaser committed a blatantly illegal block, drawing a foul. Henry, Ravenclaw's younger chaser, floated aside as Roger Davis, the acting captain, swooped in to take the free throw. He launched the quaffle cleanly through the goal hoops. "Score," called the announcer. The scoreboard flipped to 60-10 in Ravenclaw's favor. At the same moment, Slytherin's chaser Montague caught the return pass and drove forward. But Dennis and Woody, true to Roger's orders, tangled up with the rival beaters, forcing them to swing their bats wildly and miss. Johnny and Phoenix closed in on Montague, intercepting his next attempt. That's when it happened. A glint of gold streaked past Angelina Flint's ear, so close she nearly lost her balance. Harry spotted it instantly, the golden snitch. Without a second thought, he tucked in his arms and dove. Slytherin's seeker, Terence Higgins, had seen it too. He dropped after Harry, legs churning, wings beating hard. The two seekers fell in perfect sync, each chasing the tiny gleaming target. Behind them, Ravenclaw's players peeled away from their Slytherin shadows one by one. Roger and Henry blocked Higgins' path. Johnny and Phoenix intercepted potential attacks from other directions. Even Dennis and Woody abandoned their beater assignments to form a protective cordon. All at once, the chase became a clear, open run for Harry, just the way Roger had planned. The Slytherins surged forward, but it was too late. Harry leveled out of his dive, arms shooting skyward as the golden snitch snapped shut in his fingers. The stands erupted in cheers. Bang! Came a crashing thud as Terence barreled into Ravenclaw's keeper. Keepers are usually the toughest players on the field, yet even the powerhouse Terence, renowned among seekers for his size, sent him spinning off his broom. The keeper, whose name Harry still didn't know, just rubbed his shoulder, flashed a grin, and shook his head, as the match devolved into utter chaos. Foul! The keeper left his goal! Marcus Flint sputtered from the Slytherin end 20 minutes later, but his protests fell on deaf ears. The referee had seen nothing illegal, and Lee Jordan's triumphant voice cut through the noise. Ravenclaw 160, Slytherin 60. Harry barely registered the final score. Flanked by Ron and Draco, he flew back to Hagrid's hut, where the gamekeeper awaited with steaming mugs of strong tea. Strangely, when they'd first arrived, every curtain in the cottage was drawn tight, despite Hagrid's absence at the start of the match. Now, as the three friends settled by the hearth, the mystery of those closed curtains hung quietly in the air. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Hagrid's little wooden cottage, yet inside the temperature was nearly unbearable. A roaring fire still blazed in the hearth despite the summer heat. "Hagrid, what's that?" Ron asked, pointing toward the fireplace just as Hagrid set the kettle down to pour tea. There, nestled in the embers beneath the spout, lay a large, glossy black egg. "Merlin's beard!" Hagrid exclaimed, yanking free a handful of his own tangled beard in surprise. I forgot to shield it from the heat." Harry leaned forward for a better look. "It's huge. What kind of egg is that?" Hagrid's eyes gleamed with pride. "That, my dears, is a Norwegian ridgeback dragon egg. You know how rare they are, practically extinct in the wild." Before anyone could say more, Draco Malfoy had slipped inside, crouching beside the hearth and studying the egg with hungry fascination. "That's quite the specimen," Malfoy said softly, almost to himself. "Where did you—" "Don't pretend you don't see him, Hagrid," Ron mumbled under his breath. For a moment, Hagrid looked between Malfoy and his two friends, uneasy. In his mind, every Slytherin was trouble, worst of all when their parents were Death Eaters. Yet here was Malfoy, his pale face alight with genuine wonder and knowledge. If someone cared enough to know about dragons, perhaps he wasn't wholly bad. Shaking off his bias, Hagrid nodded to Draco. "Right, well, if you're that interested, listen up. I read it all in Raising Dragons for Fun and Profit. Very thorough book, that one. Dragon eggs hatch in the heat because the mother's breath warms them. That's why this one's in the fire. Just need to keep an eye on the temperature. Too hot and you'll scorch the egg. Too cool and it won't hatch at all." Draco's eyebrows rose. "You're saying it'll actually hatch here?" "If it's cared for properly," Hagrid said, dusting off his hands on his moleskin coat. "I've filled the kettle with extra hot water to keep the coals steady. We'll need to check it every few minutes. Make sure it's nice and snug but never burning." Ron and Harry exchanged amazed glances, while Draco leaned in closer, his earlier smugness replaced by earnest fascination. As Hagrid adjusted the kettle and rearranged the coals, he felt a twinge of shame for his earlier prejudice. Wasn't it just like a Slytherin to assume all others were enemies? But here, in the flickering orange light, students from Gryffindor and Slytherin gathered united by a single extraordinary creature about to emerge from its shell. Outside, the sun dipped lower, but inside Hagrid's hut, the true heat was only just beginning. After it hatches, feed it half a bucket of brandy mixed with chicken blood every 30 minutes. Hagrid withdrew a battered notebook from underneath his pillow and glared at Malfoy, still refusing to address him by name. "Brandy? No, that can't be right," Draco snapped. "Brandy will just make the dragon's flames stronger and far more aggressive." Hagrid tutted. "Well, forgive my bluntness, but you do live in a wooden hut, don't you?" Draco's eyes narrowed. He scarcely minded being called you. He'd used the same form of address on Hagrid, but a rough fellow like this had no business owning such a precious egg. Is that so? Unfazed, Hagrid jotted the corrected feeding schedule into his palm-sized notebook. He was about to ask another question when Ron elbowed in. Where did you get it, Hagrid? Ron crouched by the hearth, practically crowding Draco out of the way. He looked green with envy. After all, Hagrid was his friend first. It must have cost you a fortune. I didn't buy it, Hagrid said, tucking his quill away. I won it. Had a card game in the village last night with some stranger who was probably only too happy to offload it. Draco frowned, exchanging a pointed look with Harry, who was quietly urging Hagrid to handle the egg with extra care. Though what Hagrid was doing was strictly forbidden, he paid it no mind. He leaned over the hearth, poking at the blue-tinged flames with a long metal poker, all the while humming a joyful tune. Every so often, he glanced over at Draco and peppered him with another question, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. And then what's the next step? Hagrid would ask, as the fire crackled softly. Draco swallowed, then did his best to explain. Special thanks to classmate 221-030187566 for your monthly support, and my gratitude to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 170, Draco's Tip. It was just past 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Harry, Ron, and Draco set off across the grounds toward Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy's brow was knitted so tightly that, after a few silent minutes, Harry finally asked, Draco, you look like you swallowed a blast-ended scroot. What's bothering you? Something to do with Hagrid's dragon egg? Draco gave Harry a long, measured look. Partly, he admitted, then motioned for them to slow down. I examined Hagrid's egg again. It really is a Norwegian ridgeback hatchling, and that's exactly why I'm uneasy. Ron's eyes went wide. Hagrid wouldn't lie about what he bought, would he? Weasley, please, Draco sneered. Your brother Charlie works with dragons professionally. Surely you know dragon eggs aren't allowed to be traded privately. It's strictly illegal. Harry frowned. Then how did Hagrid get one in the first place? Nocturne Alley, Draco replied lowly. Once word spreads that you possess a dragon egg, no one dares question you. Dealers in the shadows will buy and sell them, but they won't seize them outright. Everyone, thieves, dark wizards, you name it, knows better than to risk crossing a dragon keeper. Ron shook his head. But if they're so valuable, why don't these dark wizards just ambush the fences and steal the eggs themselves? Because dragon breeding is a Romanian monopoly, Draco explained. Their Ministry of Magic controls every clutch and imposes brutal penalties. That's why Charlie Weasley had to relocate to Romania for work. There's no legal dragon husbandry here in Britain. And when it comes to value, one dragon is a walking treasure trove. Scales, horns, bones, even the blood fetches a fortune. Harry's heart sank. Hagrid's innocent excitement now seemed dangerously reckless. They climbed the castle steps in silence, each of them grappling with Draco's warning. None of them suspected that a single dragon egg could draw them into shadows darker than they'd ever imagined. Harry, Ron, and Draco gathered in a secluded corner of the library, the hush of worn leather-bound tomes surrounding them. Draco leaned forward, brows knitting in concern. Everyone knows about Professor Dumbledore's work on the 12 uses of dragon's blood, he began. But in Britain's underground markets, dragon components, blood, scales, even discarded hide, are so tightly regulated that Nocturne Alley enforces severe penalties on anyone caught trading them. Thieves can't even snatch dragon tissue without risking Auror intervention. He paused, glancing from Harry to Ron. And a living dragon egg? Its value is beyond imagination. Harry tapped his finger against the table. Then why would someone give Hagrid a dragon egg so carelessly? They must not realize what they've unleashed. There are still wild dragons in Britain, Ron chimed in, shrugging. Welsh greens, Hebridean blacks, all under strict ministry protection. It's the ministry's job to hide them from muggles. If a non-wizard spots one, they obliviate them on the spot. Draco folded his arms. Dragons here are classified as protected creatures, illegal to hunt, sell, or own without express ministry permission. Anyone who understands the true worth of a dragon egg also knows precisely how it's traded. Harry exchanged a worried look with Ron. So whoever gave Hagrid that egg must be someone with serious connections, either very foolish or very daring. They fell silent, the implications heavy in the air. A dragon egg in Hagrid's care was more than a curiosity. It was a potential catastrophe, and someone had just handed it to the keeper of keys and grounds without a second thought. Harry and Ron exchanged a guilty look as Draco finished speaking. He said, "He must be after something from Hagrid, or maybe he's already taken it." Neither boy dared meet Draco's eyes. Instead, they silently mouthed the words "Philosopher's Stone." The following afternoon, once Charms class ended and the Ravenclaws had poured into their common room, Harry and Ron sprinted across the lawns toward Hagrid's hut. They knocked breathlessly. Hagrid swung the door open and blinked in surprise. "Back again? You lot here to see the dragon egg, or have another question?" Before Harry could answer, Draco Malfoy stepped out of the shadows behind Hagrid. Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't think you'd manage to sneak off without me." Harry and Ron came to an awkward halt. Draco folded his arms and grinned. "Are you asking my gamekeeper something behind my back, Potter?" Draco taunted. Hagrid's face darkened. He ignored Draco and fixed Harry and Ron with a keen look. "This isn't about Nicholas Flamel, is it?" Ron puffed up proudly. "Actually, we did our research. We found out who Flamel is and how he's lived for over 600 years. Draco's sneer vanished. "What? How?" Hagrid threw up his hands and muttered, "Merlin's beard? You know about the stone?" He glared at the boys. "All right, enough games. What is it you want to know?" Harry took a steadying breath. "We just need the truth, Hagrid, about Flamel, about the stone, everything you can tell us." Under Draco's furious glare, Hagrid stepped back and closed the door, ready at last to answer their questions. "This is about the safety of the Philosopher's Stone," Harry said, his voice earnest. For a moment the cabin fell silent. Finally, Hagrid cleared his throat. "All right then, I'll tell you." Draco Malfoy's eyes shot open. "The stones at Hogwarts? That's—" "Pipe down, Malfoy," Ron growled, shooting Draco a warning look so Hagrid wouldn't change his mind. Harry leaned forward. "Besides Fluffy, is Professor Quirrell part of the security measures protecting the stone?" Hagrid's brows knitted in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "We've learned more than you might think," Harry replied coolly. Hagrid sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, it's all top secret. To be honest, even I don't know every detail. But you're right, it makes sense that the stone's here. After all, it was almost stolen from Gringotts, and Hogwarts is the safest place for it." Ron pressed on. "Hagrid, we just need a yes or no. Is Quirrell involved?" Harry reached out and gently took Hagrid's huge hand. The soft look in his green eyes reminded Hagrid of Lily and of the time he'd carried Harry to the Dursleys on Sirius's motorbike when he was just a baby. With a reluctant nod, Hagrid's voice softened. "All right," he said quietly. "Professor Quirrell is involved. Let me say it again, so you understand. Don't you dare try to break in." "Let's review the security," Harry replied. "Dumbledore borrowed Fluffy from me, then enlisted half the staff to cast protective spells. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall," he counted on his fingers, "Professor Snape, and of course Dumbledore himself performed magic." Hagrid's eyes widened, as if he'd just realized something. "You're not worried about any mistakes by Professor Quirrell?" he asked. "Listen, with Dumbledore's enchantments on that trapdoor, there isn't a wizard alive who could get the stone out of Hogwarts." "You lot worry far too much," Hagrid grumbled, shaking his head. Then he paused. "No, that's not what I mean." He looked from Harry to Ron. "Do you remember the night you won Norbert in a card game? Tell me, what did that stranger you were playing against look like?" Harry leaned forward, eager. "What did he say to you? Why would that have anything to do with Professor Quirrell? Are you suggesting Quirrell, who's in Ravenclaw, might be behind this? Sorry if I'm jumping to conclusions, Hagrid." Hagrid gave an uneasy laugh. "No offense taken. Now please, tell me what you recall." Harry gave Hagrid's arm a gentle shake. "Come on, Hagrid." Hagrid sighed. "Honestly, I couldn't see much. The place was dim, and in the Hog's Head most customers wrapped themselves head to toe in cloaks." Hagrid trudged along, muttering under his breath, "It's not every day a wizard like me gets an unexpected visitor." At that pace, he'd talk until dusk before actually saying anything important. Harry fell in beside him, impatience pricking at every step. Did he ask about Fluffy? Was he especially interested in the three-headed dog? Hagrid's face lit up. Oh, yes, he thought it was fascinating. After all, how often do you come across a three-headed dog, even at Hogwarts? So I mentioned that Fluffy isn't so hard to handle once you know the trick. You just soothe him with music, and he'll calm right down and fall asleep. Then Hagrid's eyes went wide with horror. Damn it, I shouldn't have told you that. He gently pulled his arm back from Harry's grip and lowered his voice. It's dangerous where the stone's hidden. Even if someone makes it past Fluffy, there are other professors on guard. Draco Malfoy, who'd been examining a dragon egg peeking from the stranger's coat pocket, smirked and added in a cool tone. You're worrying about the wrong security, Hagrid. The real prize isn't a magic stone, it's a dragon. And this newcomer just happens to have a dragon egg in his pocket? Who carries dragon eggs around all day? You do realize that's against wizarding law, don't you? And it seems he's taken a particular interest in Fluffy, too. Harry, you're saying you think the man might actually be Quirrell? Malfoy asked, brow raised. Chapter 171. Serious Hagrid adults often dismiss what children say, simply because kids rarely explain themselves clearly. In the original timeline, for example, Harry, Ron, and Hermione planned to ask Professor McGonagall where Dumbledore had gone, and Harry wanted to warn her that someone was plotting to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Yet when the moment came, he only blurted out, I think someone's going to steal the stone, without any details about why he believed it, what evidence he'd seen, or exactly what he feared. That vagueness may have been meant to hide Hagrid's accidental revelation of Fluffy's weakness. Still, Harry could easily have said, Fluffy is vulnerable to music. When he hears a tune, he falls asleep, and we know Snape was attacked by the three-headed dog. Had he explained it that way, Professor McGonagall would at least have acknowledged that they all knew about Snape's injury and the strength of Dumbledore's protections. She might even have gone to inspect the defenses herself, and found a way to contact Dumbledore to come back and deal with the threat. Harry had never entirely understood the original timeline. He'd just rushed to untangle cause and effect. In truth, even if he'd done nothing, Voldemort still couldn't have snatched the Philosopher's Stone from the Mirror of Erised. What changed everything was how Harry and Draco's suspicions finally snapped Hagrid awake to the odd origin of that dragon egg, and to the fact that Hagrid himself had let slip Fluffy's one weakness. Yet, bound by his unshakable faith in the defenses Dumbledore had set, he paused before marching straight to the headmaster. There were questions still begging for answers. Harry, Hagrid began once he'd wrestled his doubts into order. Do you really think the wizard who slipped me that dragon egg was Professor Quirrell? Harry met Hagrid's gaze calmly. Hagrid, remember how I knocked Quirrell flat twice in defense against the dark arts? Hagrid frowned and stroked his massive beard, eyes narrowing in thought. Then, as if a bolt had struck him, he straightened. Ah, you used that red spark, didn't you? The signal spell young witches and wizards use to call for help in the wild. That's it, Harry said. Professor Dumbledore told me my version of the red spark can even purify curses. At the mention of Dumbledore's name, Hagrid went utterly still, his face paling as he absorbed the weight of what Harry had just revealed. Harry stood by the hearth, eyes bright with urgency. Everyone else is fine. Only Professor Quirrell collapsed. I'm certain he was under a curse. Ron's jaw tightened. Across the room, Draco lounged against the fireplace mantel, one hand idly tracing the contours of the dragon egg perched there. He smirked. Are you lot all right in the head? How did you even manage to breach Ravenclaw's defenses? Harry met Draco's sneer head-on. Professor Dumbledore is the greatest white wizard of our age. He was the first to recognize the curse on Quirrell. Of course, he knew Quirrell had been bewitched and forced to obey. Draco folded his arms. You're worrying far too much. In my view, every enchantment along that fourth-floor corridor, apart from Dumbledore's personal wards, is nothing more than a time delay. If I were the dark wizard controlling Quirrell, I'd want just that. A little chaos to drive Dumbledore out of Hogwarts long enough to get on with my plans. Ron shook his head in mock admiration. Well done, Malfoy. Only a true Slytherin would dream up something so cunning. Draco opened his mouth to retort, but Hagrid's booming voice cut through the tension. All right, you lot, that's enough. Like young Master Malfoy said, Albus Dumbledore always has his reasons. When you go back, don't tell a soul, Hagrid said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. We can't afford to interfere with Professor Dumbledore's plan to save Quirrell. He gave the student a firm nod and straightened up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to find Dumbledore. As he turned and stomped off, Hagrid's mind wandered over the strange turn of events. Quirrell might be timid and awkward in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, but he'd once held the chair of Muggle Studies, a post that didn't change from year to year. It was a permanent appointment, granted only to those whom Dumbledore trusted without question. If Dumbledore had faith in Quirrell, then so did Hagrid. Hagrid wasn't slow in the way that mattered. He simply knew his own limitations. He wasn't going to second-guess the headmaster's designs. Everyone said Dumbledore saw all and knew all, yet he often held back for reasons beyond understanding. This, too, had to be part of a larger strategy to save Quirrell. Hagrid couldn't imagine Dumbledore making a mistake. If his friend Ryan could read his thoughts right now, he'd be astonished. Hagrid knew he wasn't the brightest witch or wizard around. Better, he'd decided long ago, to follow Dumbledore's lead than to concoct a plan of his own, however well-meaning. Dumbledore had chosen him for a reason, and Hagrid would trust that choice, no matter how little sense it sometimes made. He strode up the Hogwarts pathway, muttering under his breath, "I still can't believe it." They rounded the bend toward Hogwarts Castle, Ron's cheeks flaming with outrage. We told Hagrid about the gaps in the Forbidden Forest's defenses, and he still had the gall to kick us out. "Ron, lower your voice," Harry scolded, glancing around nervously. "We promised Hagrid we'd keep it between us." At that moment, Draco Malfoy strolled up, a mocking grin tugging at his lips. "Oh, spare me the righteous outrage, Weasley. Don't pretend this whole stunt wasn't Potter's idea. Why don't you own up?" Ron stopped in his tracks, fists clenched. "Shut your mouth, Malfoy. You wouldn't understand. Only the darkest sort of wizardry appeals to you." Harry lunged forward, gripping Ron's arm. "Ron, stop!" "Draco's not." Malfoy held up a hand, amusement flickering in his gray eyes. "Save your breath. Honestly, you two couldn't solve a simple defense riddle if your lives depended on it. After all, Ravenclaws are supposed to stand for wit and wisdom. Clearly, you're neither." Ron's face went an even deeper shade of red. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Malfoy laughed softly. "You're nothing but Potter's shadow. You prattle on about wisdom, yet you missed Dumbledore's own solution staring you in the face." He flicked his wand dismissively and strode past them, leaving Harry and Ron fuming in his wake as the castle's turrets glinted in the late afternoon sun. "Harry, Malfoy got to Hagrid's before we did this time," Ron panted, glancing anxiously down the path. "He must have twigged to us giving him the cold shoulder yesterday and sussed out that it's all about Hagrid. Honestly, he's not just clever, he's downright devious," Ron continued, cheeks reddening. He peered around, half expecting to see Draco lurking behind a tree. Harry sighed and shook his head. "You're missing the point, Ron. Draco's not worried about Hagrid. He's fixated on that dragon egg." He offered a rueful, apologetic smile in Draco's direction, knowing how tense things were. Meanwhile, Hagrid hurried across the grounds, his big boots thudding against the stone. He was more anxious than usual. Even when Filch stopped him to complain, Hagrid bit his tongue instead of snapping back. The caretaker stood baffled, watching Hagrid's retreating figure. At last, Hagrid reached the 8th-floor corridor. He paused before the stone gargoyle guarding the door to Dumbledore's office. Clearing his throat, he said, "Lemon Olaf." The gargoyle sprang aside with a grating noise, and the wall behind it split open to reveal the twisting, revolving staircase. Hagrid clambered onto the steps as they spiraled upward, the wind whipping through his hair. When the stairs finally halted, he found himself before the polished wooden door, its brass phoenix-shaped knocker gleaming softly in the torchlight. Taking a deep breath, Hagrid placed his massive hand against the door. For once, he was grateful to stay. Ours did all the climbing. Every extra second bought him time to collect his thoughts before stepping inside. He barely had time to hesitate before a firm knock sounded on the door. "I was wondering when you'd arrive, Rubus," Dumbledore's voice called through the wood. Hagrid froze in his tracks, his mind going blank as he struggled to steady himself. Chapter 172. Busy Harry. Every Hogwarts student dreaded a summons to the headmaster's office. none more so than those who'd already crossed the line. Rubeus Hagrid felt that fear more keenly than most. He'd left school in his 3rd year, but in his own mind he'd never stopped being Albus Dumbledore's student. When Hagrid's wand was shattered and expulsion seemed certain, it was Dumbledore who had offered him refuge and a job on the grounds. Orphaned at a young age, Hagrid came to see the headmaster as a father figure, so this morning's mistake cut him to the bone. Last night, over one too many glasses of fire whiskey, he'd let slip the secret of Fluffy's one weakness. A fatal error, and now Dumbledore had summoned him. He stood before the office door, heart pounding. A second knock was barely audible over his racing thoughts. Then Dumbledore's warm, unhurried voice floated through the wood. "Come in, Rubeus." Hagrid pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar office, with its crooked desk and countless oddities, felt hostile tonight. He managed a trembling, "Good evening, sir." Albus Dumbledore looked up from behind his desk, his silver beard catching the lamplight. Concern and disappointment shadowed his pale blue eyes. "What's troubling you, Rubeus?" Hagrid's mouth went dry. He opened it, closed it, and finally croaked, "Sir." Dumbledore held up a kindly hand. "I've already been informed, Rubeus. Why don't you take your dinner and return afterward? We'll talk then." Hagrid's shoulders sagged. He wasn't even surprised that the headmaster knew he'd skipped his meal. Dumbledore always seemed to know exactly what was going on. With a stiff nod, Hagrid turned and quietly closed the door behind him, dreading the conversation that lay ahead. Hagrid paused outside the headmaster's door, steeling himself. He knew he couldn't trick the great Albus Dumbledore with cleverness alone. He had to be honest. Gathering every ounce of courage, he stepped inside the office. Professor Dumbledore sat behind his desk, which was cluttered not with paperwork, but with half-eaten snacks, biscuits, fruit scones, and most peculiarly, a plate piled high with mint candies. All the usual documents had been swept to one side. With a twinkle in his eye, Dumbledore speared a potato, skin and all, on his fork and offered it to Hagrid. "Rubeus, care for one?" he asked. Hagrid shook his head, though his stomach betrayed him with a loud rumble. He cleared his throat and forced his gaze to the portraits lining the walls. The former headmasters leaned forward in their frames, eavesdropping intently. One particularly rotund wizard, pink-nosed and ruddy-cheeked, even fiddled with an antique hearing aid. When Dumbledore cleared his throat, the plump portrait wizard hastily pretended to slip the device into his other ear, his expression sheepish. Ignoring the portrait's covert scrutiny, Hagrid squared his broad shoulders and met Dumbledore's kindly gaze. "Professor," he began, voice steady despite the trembling in his heart, "there's something important I need to tell you." Hagrid shuffled into Dumbledore's office, looking more sheepish than usual. "Professor, I was at the Hog's Head last night, had a bit too much to drink, and I let slip about Fluffy." Dumbledore's pale blue eyes regarded him without a flicker of surprise. Hagrid swallowed, hurried on. "And I've got my suspicions about Professor Quirrell. I think he's been cursed, and he's after the Philosopher's Stone." He paused, then blurted out the rest. "Harry, Ron, and that Malfoy lad, they've heard about the stone too. They even told me where it's kept. I leaked that secret, and now I'm worried they'll try to break into the restricted corridor on the 4th floor." Dumbledore leaned back, steepling his long fingers. "Thank you for telling me, Rubeus. I have my own arrangements for Professor Quirrell. You needn't worry." His tone was gentle but final. Hagrid hesitated, tugging at his beard. "Professor, you'll keep an eye on the students then? I don't want them getting into trouble or getting hurt." Dumbledore's shoulders lifted in a small, reassuring shrug. "Of course, Rubeus. Everything's under control." He tapped his desk, and at once an extra place setting appeared. A plate piled with steaming stew, a sprig of parsley for garnish, and a massive carved oak chair slid in beside his own. It looked sturdy enough to seat a giant. Perfect for Hagrid. Dumbledore smiled. "Why not stay for dinner before you go?" Hagrid grinned back, relief washing over his features. "I'd like that very much, sir." After Harry once again played a decisive role in Ravenclaw's second Quidditch victory, his teammates finally believed that winning the cup was more than just a hollow slogan. Harry's reputation at Hogwarts soared, like that of a seasoned actor who, after countless trials, had triumphantly reclaimed center stage. Yet with that fame came new complications. classmates competing for his attention, and the ever-shifting house standings threatening to upend their daily schedules. Fortunately, the Ravenclaws had fallen into the habit of rising before dawn, so the only thing they risked being late for was, well, actually, they still managed to cut it perilously close to every class. Of course, not all the attention was admiring. The Slytherin Seekers, already notorious for their underhanded tactics on the pitch, began to spread vile rumors about Harry, hoping to rattle him mentally. It was a miscalculation. Flush with recent honors, Harry shrugged off their slander as easily as he caught the golden snitch. What they hadn't anticipated was Ravenclaw's own Rita Skeeter-Sue, Kate, prowling the corridors with quill in hand, eager to unearth the truth and expose their lies to the entire school. Although Harry had clashed with Kate before, he was still Ravenclaw's brightest hope for this year's Quidditch Cup. So when an anonymous cyberbullying campaign against him dragged on for weeks, everyone at Hogwarts was eager to uncover the culprit. It didn't take long. The ringleader's identity was exposed, and word spread like wildfire through every common room and corridor. Professor Snape, outraged that his students had turned their magic towards such a mean-spirited scheme, handed down severe punishment. The offenders lost 12 house points and were sentenced to a full term of detention. According to Draco, there was no favoritism at play. Under normal circumstances, the dean might dock a point or two and assign a light chore, but Snape's penalties were deliberately extreme. The guilty parties would spend their free hours in the dungeons, sorting through and disposing of foul potion ingredients, a grueling, odorous task. Ron stared in disbelief. Suddenly, Slytherin's streak of 7 consecutive House Cup victories made perfect sense. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tended to be more laid back, but Gryffindor's head of house demanded nothing less than excellence. As the youngest in a long line of Gryffindor brothers, Ron understood the value of strict oversight. Where Professor McGonagall balanced kindness with unwavering fairness, Snape's harsh discipline kept his students on edge, and Slytherin firmly in the lead. Chapter 7. Points, Protection, and Preparation. Professor Snape never hesitated to dock points, most often from his own house. 7 or 8 points could vanish in an instant, and on a particularly bad day, he'd strip away 50 without a moment's shame. When trouble arose among students from other houses, he'd scowl, wave his wand, and summon their heads of house to deal with it directly. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout both took a more hands-on approach when disciplining miscreants in their care, but Snape's signature punishment was a swift loss of points and an inescapable detention. He bore down on rule breakers with a smug satisfaction that earned him both fear and grudging respect. "What a gentleman," the other staff would mutter sarcastically. Outside the Quidditch pitch, Slytherins still tried to ambush Harry and the first years he mentored. Given Harry's prowess on the broom and Snape's previous crawl, sea-downs, such attacks should have been unthinkable, but the green and silver crew lived for underhanded tactics. To thwart them, Captain Johnny McLaughlin arranged a rotating escort of upper-class players to see Harry safely to and from every practice and class. No one ever left their side alone. At the same time, there was a fresh face back in the lineup. Roger Latimer had returned to the team. His comeback meant a shake-up in their training schedule. Where they once held 1 tactical session and 2 full scrimmage drills each week, now every session after the Monday strategy workshop focused on live practice. Dozens of chaser passes, countless defensive drills, and relentless mock matches left every member breathless by week's end. Johnny insisted that if Slytherin thought they could catch Gryffindor off guard, they were in for a rude awakening. Between Snape's tightening grip on discipline, the closer security detail, and Roger's renewed competitiveness, the Gryffindor squad was on edge, but also sharper than ever. With House Cup points at stake and the Quidditch semifinals approaching, there was no room for mistakes. Harry had politely declined the role of acting captain, yet the pressure didn't ease. Every time he stepped onto the pitch, he felt the weight of his teammates' expectations pressing down on him. From Roger to the youngest first year, every pair of eyes bore into him, silently asking him to lead. The constant scrutiny rattled Harry so much that for a moment he even forgot about the Philosopher's Stone and the Dragon Egg. He assumed the egg would be whisked off to Dumbledore for safekeeping, and it slipped entirely from his thoughts. In fact, Harry hadn't noticed Draco Malfoy slipping out of the Great Hall at dinner each night. Draco was in a different house, and their only shared lesson was herbology, so it was easy to overlook him. Between late-night studying and extra Quidditch practice, Harry was too busy to pay attention to anything else, until the unexpected happened at breakfast one morning. Hedwig swooped in, carrying a small scrap of parchment that she dropped at his place. In Hagrid's familiar scrawl were just 4 words, "Hatching soon." Chapter 1173, The Hatched Norwegian Ridgeback. Friday morning dawned bright and surprisingly light at Hogwarts, only one class on the schedule, potions. Harry, Hermione, and Ron took their seats in the dungeons, and Harry couldn't resist a grumble. "Potions on a Friday?" he muttered. "If only Snape would treat us like Sprout does in herbology. No shouting, no calling names." Hermione shot him a sideways glance. "You're lucky Snapey even lets you sneak out here sometimes." Across the table, Ron leaned in, lowering his voice until only Harry could hear. "Missing class would be madness. When else do you get to see a dragon hatch?" Harry glared at him. "Quiet." He swiftly lobbed his half-eaten sausage toward Ron's plate to shut him up. "The real question is, why does Hagrid still have that dragon egg? Do you think he's kept it from Dumbledore?" Ron shrugged. "Maybe Hagrid's hiding it on Dumbledore's orders." Hermione frowned. "Or perhaps Dumbledore wants to break Romania's dragon-breeding monopoly by starting a new wing here at Hogwarts, and Hagrid's been told to guard the eggs until the time is right." The three exchanged tense looks. If Hermione was right, Charlie Weasley would have to return from Romania to help with the hatchlings. Ron's eyes lit up at the prospect. "We need to ask Hagrid what's really going on," Harry said, rising from the bench. As Snape's students began to file into the classroom beyond the stone door, the trio slipped away down the corridor. Their destination was Hagrid's hut, the only place they might uncover the truth about the hidden dragon eggs and what lay ahead for the newest arrival, a Norwegian Ridgeback. Chapter 7. Brothers in Red and Gold. Ron always knew his family loved him. After all, the Weasley house ran on loud quarrels and louder laughter, but each brother showed that love in his own way. Fred and George, spotting Ron sulking one afternoon, couldn't resist a prank. They rigged his cauldron to burble out soap bubbles, sending Ron scurrying around the kitchen in a frothy mess. Embarrassed at first, he soon found himself chuckling along with them as Ginny lined up to pop every last bubble. Percy, ever the responsible middle child, noticed Ron didn't have a proper pet. With a solemn nod, he handed over Scabbers, the scrawny old rat he'd been raising, and insisted Ron look after him from now on. "Important responsibilities build character," Percy declared, marching off to polish his ministry-issue binder. Bill, 7 years Ron's senior, treated him like a pleasant but distant cousin. Their age gap meant they'd seldom shared mischief or confidences at home. Only Charlie truly felt like a kindred spirit. Even by Gryffindor standards, Charlie's skill as a seeker was extraordinary. If he hadn't gone off to study dragons in Romania, he might well have played for the British Quidditch team. To Ron, Charlie wasn't just an older brother. He was a hero, and Charlie returned that admiration tenfold. On Christmas morning, he presented Ron with a gift more precious than any pygmy puff. "I got this wand just for emergencies," Charlie said, pulling out a dark, sturdy piece of yew. "Consider it a second life. If yours ever, goes flying off, you've got this." Ron's eyes shone as he cradled the spare wand in his hand. In the original timeline, back in that cursed flying car incident under the Homping Willow, this second wand might have fallen into the Forbidden Forest forever. But here it was, a promise of protection from the brother he loved most in the world. Harry watched all this with a puzzled frown. He saw Ron's beaming face, but couldn't imagine what had made him so happy. His own thoughts clung to the dragon egg he'd glimpsed earlier, and the mysterious Sorcerer's Stone hidden somewhere in Hogwarts. When he caught sight of Ron's gleeful grin, Harry jumped to the worst conclusion. "You're planning to skip charms, aren't you?" he blurted. Ron blinked, wand tucked safely in his robes, and shook his head in disbelief. "Skip class? Me? No way." He straightened up, determined to prove Harry wrong, and to keep this perfect moment with Charlie's gift all to himself. Ron's eyes gleamed with excitement as he leaned in close. Come on, Harry. Let's ditch our next class, just long enough to slip downstairs and see Hagrid's dragon eggs. Harry's expression hardened. You're out of your mind. If we miss class, we'll be in serious trouble, and word will get out about Hagrid's dragons. He'd be in deeper hot water than any of us. But Ron only chuckled. You're forgetting one thing. Everyone knows Snape practically dotes on you. Just whisper that you need a minute or two, and he'll let you go. Then it's a straight shot to the stables. Ryan, who'd been hovering nearby, pretending not to listen, could hardly believe Ron was actually suggesting this. Skipping class and trusting Snape to look the other way? I can't do it, Harry said firmly. Not even for Hagrid. Later that morning, in the potions classroom, Professor Snape swept in like a gathering storm. Lily Evans sat in the front row, her forehead creased as she reviewed her notes. Beside her, Ron was practically vibrating with anticipation. Snape's cold gaze settled on him. Mr. Weasley, he said, voice as sharp as broken glass. I'm beginning to suspect the sorting hat malfunctioned on you. Perhaps you should try it again. See if it fancies placing you in Hufflepuff. A ripple of laughter ran through the room. Before Ron could respond, Dudley Malfoy, proudly sporting Hufflepuff robes, bolted to his feet, face flushed. I highly doubt Hufflepuff would want him, he declared, as if defending the very honor of his house. Seated a few desks away, Ryan couldn't help but stifle a grin. Snape, of all people, defending Hufflepuff, and Dudley charging to its aid. The irony was not lost on him as the rest of the class buzzed with amusement. Dudley and the other Hufflepuffs unleashed their frustration on Ron. The moment Dudley sat down, his housemates shot Ron indignant looks. Even Hannah Abbott and Ernie Macmillan, students who'd always been friendly with Ron, seemed upset. Snape, however, appeared not to hear a word of it. Perhaps in his mind, Dudley was family on Lily's side, and thus exempt from criticism. Instead of reprimanding the rowdy Hufflepuffs, Snape simply turned his cold gaze back to Harry, who'd been staring blankly at his cauldron, lost in thoughts about the dragon egg incident. The professor's stiff, over-the-top praise snapped Harry out of his reverie. Snape's gaunt face twisted into an awkward expression of concern as he lavished compliments on Harry's brewing technique. To Harry's left, Ron sat scowling, clearly feeling wronged, and the sight of his brother's wounded look nearly sent Harry's stirring wand into a disastrous swirl. For a heartbeat, the potion in Harry's vial threatened to bubble over, but his practiced hand and remarkable potion skills kept it perfectly composed. Had he slipped up, it wouldn't have been Harry who suffered the blow. The only casualty would have been Ron. At last, the tense hour mercifully drew to a close. Harry dashed through the corridor until he spotted Anthony, second only to himself in prestige among the first years. Pulling him aside, Harry whispered urgently, I can't lead our group back to the common room this time. Can you get a couple of older students to shepherd everyone instead? We've got to avoid Peeves. Across the hall, Hermione commanded even more respect among the rookies. She treated them like a conscientious schoolteacher, handing out advice and encouragement as if she were doling porridge to hungry Ravenclaws. But lately, she'd hardly left Ryan's side, and Harry couldn't bear the thought of Ryan discovering their secret. Ryan was no ordinary wizard. Rumor had it he possessed the power to slip past the enchantments on the forbidden fourth floor and snatch the Philosopher's Stone itself. Harry wasn't willing to take that risk. Human nature was too easily corrupted. He couldn't afford to lose Ryan, neither as a friend nor as the mysterious mentor he hoped would one day help him eke over the Resurrection Stone. Unnoticed until now, Ryan stood just behind Hermione. As Harry hurriedly steered Ron and Anthony out of the castle, Ryan's lips curled into a sly smile. How naive, he mused. So long as they remained at Hogwarts, not one of them would evade his watchful eye. Harry and Ron slipped out of the castle and hurried across the dew-drenched lawn toward the edge of the forbidden forest. Hagrid was waiting for them at his cottage, eyes gleaming with excitement. You're just in time, he whispered, swinging open the door and ushering them inside. Before the two friends could step fully into the dimly lit room, a sharp voice cut in from the shadows. Close the doors and windows, and be careful not to be seen. Draco Malfoy's tone was low, but urgent. Harry's heart gave a familiar flip. He knew exactly why Draco had been sneaking off alone every night. On the rough wooden table lay a single, massive egg, its shell marred by a deep fissure. Faint, rhythmic clicking came from within. Ron leaned closer, curiosity shining in his eyes, but said nothing. Hagrid moved swiftly to bar the shutters, his massive hands shaking almost imperceptibly with excitement. Draco, standing just behind him, kept watch through a narrow crack in the window. All three boys huddled around the table, breath bated as the shell began to shift. The clicking grew louder, urgent, frantic, until with a final, grating crack it gave way. A small black creature unfurled itself onto the wood. Spiky ridges ran down its back, leathery wings arched above its body, and a long, pointed snout quivered in the gloom. Harry stared in astonishment. "It's a Norwegian ridgeback," he whispered. Hagrid's eyes filled with tears of joy. Draco allowed himself the barest hint of a smile. And Ron could only gape as the newborn dragon blinked up at them, wet and trembling, ready to take its first breath of the world. It resembled a crumpled black umbrella, its nostrils stark white, small horn-like nodules crowning its head, and fiery orange-red eyes bulging unnaturally outward. Then it let out a thunderous sneeze, and sparks flew from its nostrils. Harry had only ever encountered dragons in stories, scaly monsters with serpentine tails and bat-like wings, breathing fire or venom. In fairy tales, they symbolize greed and malevolence, razing villages and hoarding mighty treasures. They stand for power, majesty, and dread. Slaying one makes you a hero, your name carried down through the ages. But the hatchling before Harry looked less fearsome legend than awkward curiosity. Its hide was mottled gray and green, its wings too small for flight, and its beady yellow eyes stared around with an almost comical wariness. Harry glanced at Draco. Was he really so enthralled by these beasts that he'd made friends with Hagrid, the keeper of keys and grounds, the one person Malfoys most loved to mock? Hagrid crouched beside the little dragon, his massive frame dwarfing the creature. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he murmured, stroking its scaly head. The hatchling let out a tiny hiss, then snapped playfully at Hagrid's finger, bearing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Blimey," Hagrid said, pulling his hand back and inspecting a bead of blood. "There, see how she knows her mum already?" From a short distance away, Draco raised an eyebrow. "Good thing you've got invisible dragon skin gloves on, Hagrid," he teased. "Or else you're braver than I'd ever credit." Harry gaped in surprise as Draco, at Hagrid's gentle urging, actually called the giant by name instead of barking "big man" or "you." Before Hagrid could answer, Ron, brimming with bravado, stepped forward and imitated Hagrid's stance. With a mocking grin, he reached a trembling hand toward the Norwegian ridgeback. "Come on, Malfoy," he jeered. "Too chicken for dragons?" In an instant, the dragon snapped its jaws shut. "Ow! It bit me!" Ron yelped, jerking his right hand back. Blood welled between his fingers. Without thinking, Harry drew his wand. "Episki!" he cried, and suddenly Ron's wound yanked itself closed. Ron stared at Harry in disbelief. "Where did you learn that? We've never been taught this spell." For a moment, the gash was gone, only for the skin to split open again the next heartbeat, this time turning a nasty shade of green. Remarkably, no new blood emerged. Ron's face twisted in pain and confusion. Harry frowned, raising his wand again. "Doesn't hurt much, does it?" "There's a reason. A Norwegian ridgeback's bite injects a toxin that delays normal healing and numbs the area. Weasley, congratulations. You've actually been useful for once. You've taught me something about dragons." Ron lifted his bandaged hand, speechless, as Harry shot him a half-smile. Around them, Hagrid's ridgeback snuffled softly, apparently unbothered by the commotion, while two Hogwarts students learned a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Draco Malfoy knelt beside Ron and turned his hand over in the torchlight. "Harry," he said, frowning, "your spell has made that wound go green far faster than a normal infection." Harry's face drained of color. "What should we do? I'll go get Madame Pomfrey." Ron caught his arm. "Madame Pomfrey, do you really want to explain to her that Ron Weasley got this in a dragon's mouth? She'll make more trouble than she solves." Draco studied the bite. "It's not fatal, but by tomorrow morning your hand will be twice its normal size. With the way you've aggravated it," Draco added with a faint smirk, "I'd say it'll be at least a month before it fully heals." Then, just as Hagrid hadn't looked away from his dragon for a moment, Draco's attention slipped back to the creature. "A month?" Ron echoed, eyes wide. "But Snape—" "Yes, I know. Harry interrupted, glancing at Draco. You're thinking of when Professor Snape got chomped by that three-headed dog, Ron shrugged. His wound closed up nearly overnight. Draco raised an eyebrow. And why do you think that was? Because Snape's the potions master. He had every cure at his disposal. You two aren't so well equipped. He straightened and threw a quick glance at Hagrid, who was still transfixed by his new dragon. We're on our own for this one. Hagrid's hut smelled of damp woo-ah, and the tang of dragon smoke. Inside, Hagrid beamed with pride as he fussed over the creature curled on the table. Draco Malfoy circled them both, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Incredible, he murmured, eyes never leaving the dragon's iridescent scales. Suddenly, Hagrid's gaze snapped to Ron Weasley, who was cradling his left hand. Blimey, Ron, what happened to your hand? He asked, alarmed. Ron yanked his sleeve back to reveal a swollen bruise. Your dragon bit me, he snapped. Your precious dragon! Brilliant, Hagrid exclaimed, clapping his huge hands. I'll call her Norbert. Oops, are you all right, Ron? He cocked his head like a happy puppy, as if he'd only remembered Ron existed. Ron glared. Do I look all right to you? He said, voice flat with sarcasm. Hagrid blinked, then shrugged off Ron's pain and turned back to the dragon. She's just a baby. A bit of rest and you'll be fine, he said, stroking Norbert's neck. Draco cleared his throat. Professor, she's female, he pointed out, barely suppressing a smirk. If you're going to name her, it should be Norberta. Hagrid's eyes went wide. A female, is she? Well, I'll be Norberta it is. He laughed and returned to fussing over the dragon, as though Ron's injury were no more than a scratch. Ron stared at him, exasperated. In Hagrid's world, biting a young wizard hardly qualified as an emergency. It was the same mistake he'd made time and again, misjudging the danger his magical creatures posed, assuming every boy was as tough as he once was. And right now, Ron would have appreciated a little more concern and a lot less dragon talk. Hagrid peered at Draco with genuine curiosity. Draco, how did you know? Draco stood a little taller, pride in his voice. A male Norwegian ridgeback isn't covered in nearly that many spikes, and its snout is noticeably shorter. Without missing a beat, Hagrid pulled out his palm-sized notebook and began furiously jotting down Draco's observations. Harry almost forgot that Ron was still clutching his injured hand, wincing with every movement. My hand. How am I supposed to write for the next month? Ron groaned, rubbing the bite mark as though it might vanish on its own. As they turned to leave the hut, Harry's curiosity finally got the better of him. Hagrid, did you tell Professor Dumbledore about Quirrell? Hagrid knelt by the tiny dragon, offering drops of chicken blood at the tip of a spoon, then looked up with a nod. Aye, I did. He straightened and gingerly closed his notebook. Now that's really not your concern, you three. Dumbledore's already taken care of it, but I do have one serious bit of advice. Stay far away from the fourth-floor corridor, or you'll regret it. His warning hung in the air, but the fierce kindness in his eyes returned almost at once as he reached down to stroke the dragon's scales. It was then that Harry's gaze flicked to a small, mottled egg nestled in the straw. He pointed, eyes wide. The dragon egg! Harry realized, with a thrill, that his talent for spotting hidden details applied to more than just snitches. Hagrid's barked orders echoed through the twilight clearing. I've told you everything you need to know. Now off with you. With that, he briskly waved them toward the path back to the castle. As they climbed the hill, Ron was still fuming. Honestly, he torched his own footbridge, nearly burned me to a crisp, and then expected me to help him raise a dragon in that rickety cabin, and my hand still hurts. Harry frowned. You know, you could try the fire and water charm. It's standard for any dragon expert. Ron's eyes lit up. Charlie? I'll write to him at the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. He's a dragon specialist. He'll know exactly how to patch me up or teach me that charm. Perfect, Harry agreed. Charlie Weasley, one of the finest dragonologists in the field. Ron practically bounced. Brilliant. Only, you'll help me write the letter, won't you? From the edge of the trees, Draco Malfoy sneered. Weasley writing a coherent error. I'd pay to see that. Ignoring the taunt, Harry allowed himself a small grin. Actually, I thought Charlie might be able to take the dragon off Hagrid's hands before anyone notices it's there. Draco scowled, still smarting from being kicked out of Hagrid's hut. Harry gave a dry laugh. Exactly. It looks like you've only pasted 2 sentences so far. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like revised? Once I have the complete passage, I'll be happy to rewrite it into a coherent, idiomatic English version. Chapter 175, Ryan is a little angry. By 8 o'clock Saturday morning, most of the Ravenclaw dormitory was still fast asleep, Ryan included, tucked soundly beneath his blankets. Harry and Ron, however, were already up and about. As Draco had predicted, Ron's right hand was grotesquely swollen, resembling a pig's trotter more than a human limb. Since Ron, now a Ravenclaw, had formed the habit of finishing his homework every night, there was no way he could tackle today's assignments without assistance, and Ravenclaw House stood to lose precious points if his work went undone. A soft humming suddenly drifted from the far corner of the room where Ryan's bed lay. Harry's heart jumped into his throat and Ron froze at his side. For nearly a minute they remained perfectly still, straining to hear any further sound. When the humming ceased and no movement followed, Harry let out a long, shaky breath. He grabbed Ron's only usable hand, his left, and without pausing to wash up, hastily changed out of his pajamas and slipped on his clothes. The two of them hurried down to the 6th-floor corridor, where Draco was waiting, arms folded and tapping his foot in impatience. Notably absent were Crabbe and Goyle, though the lack of their bulky presence didn't mean their friendship with Draco had waned. Together, Harry, Ron, and Draco prepared to face whatever challenges the day, and an increasingly irate Ryan might bring. Since the troll incident, something unexpected had happened. Draco, Harry, and Ron had grown into genuine friends, no longer master and followers, but equals in mischief and loyalty. Draco's usual cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, however, cared nothing for dragons or for muggle-born Weasleys and Potters. Draco didn't blame them. He'd rather they sleep in or play gobstones in the common room than be dragged into this most awkward of alliances. That morning, Draco met Harry and Ron in the corridor just after dawn. Together, they slipped out of the castle and made their way through dewy grass and winding paths to the outskirts of Hagrid's small clearing. His hut's windows had been shuttered tightly for days, ever since the arrival of the mysterious baby dragon. Today, their mission was clear. Persuade Hagrid to send the creature off to his brother Charlie in Romania, where it would be safe and properly cared for. When they reached the hut, Harry paused in front of the heavy wooden door, his hand hovering uncertainly over the latch. He'd no idea how Hagrid would react. Enthusiasm, anger, heartbreak? After a long moment's hesitation, he knocked gently. Silence. Then a muffled, panicked voice called from within, "Who's there?" Harry Potter," Harry answered, his voice low. The door creaked, and a pair of small, anxious eyes peered out through the crack. Ruffled hair framed a freckled forehead. Hagrid was clearly torn between surprise and worry. Harry steeled himself. "Hagrid, we'd like to talk about the dragon." The door swung wider, revealing Hagrid's towering frame, his wild hair even more unkempt than usual. His lower lip trembled as he stepped aside, motioning them into the dim, smoky warmth of his hut. Over the glow of the fire pit, the little dragon's scales caught the light in hues of emerald and gold. It looked sleepily up at the newcomers, giving a tiny, curious snort. Draco stepped forward, smoothing the front of his robes. "Hagrid," he began, forcing a confidence he didn't entirely feel, "we all know how much you love magical creatures. But keeping this dragon here, it's dangerous, and you've done more than enough for it already. What if we sent it to Charlie? He's an expert. He could give it the care it really needs." Ron swallowed, glancing nervously at Harry. "We just don't want anyone getting hurt," he added. Hagrid's great shoulders slumped. He ran a hand through his beard, glancing at the dragon, then back at the 3 faces he'd grown to trust, especially Draco's, whose offer of help felt surprisingly heartfelt. Finally, he drew a deep breath. "All right," he rumbled, voice thick with emotion. "I'll write to Charlie tonight. But not as easy as just posting a letter. We'll need to prepare a secure transport, and," he broke off, rubbing his eyes, "blasted business is more complicated than I thought." Harry gave him an encouraging smile. "We'll help, all of us. We'll do whatever it takes." Draco nodded, genuine concern in his gray eyes. "We'll figure it out, Hagrid. Together." And as the little dragon blinked sleepily in the firelight, the 4 stood united by a shared promise to do right by a creature no one else dared care for. Harry barely had a moment to register that it was just the three of them standing outside before he shepherded Ron and Hermione into Hagrid's hut. Fang wasn't inside. Only the faint rattle of his chain and the occasional bark drifting in from just beyond the door told them he'd been left tethered outside ever since Norberta arrived. Poor Fang. It seemed fickleness wasn't a flaw limited to rogues and rascals. Even big-hearted Hagrid could be caught unprepared. Harry didn't linger over the dog's misfortune. He laid out the plan he'd been refining all the way back to the castle the day before. "We have to get Norberta to Charlie," he said, voice low but urgent. "He's at the burrow, and he's an expert on dragons." Hagrid stared at him, thick eyebrows knotted in worry. "No, Harry. She's too small. She'd never survive the trip." Harry met his gaze. "That's exactly why we need Charlie. He knows how to care for hatchlings. With him, Norberta has a chance." Hagrid shifted his weight, glancing toward the corner where the little Norwegian Ridgeback was curled up among blankets. The baby dragon peeked out, neck stretched, claws flexing, its tiny teeth already stained with the telltale red smears of a young predator. In just 24 hours, she'd grown noticeably, still fragile, but alive and strong in spirit. Finally, Hagrid let out a heavy sigh. "All right," he said, rubbing a hand through his tangled hair. "But we'll have to be careful. One misstep, and it's Hogwarts on one side and Azkaban on the other." Harry grinned. "Then it's a good thing we have 3 pairs of eyes, and Charlie's dragon know-how on our side." As they moved to gather blankets and packing crates, Norberta lifted her snout and gave a soft squeak, her dark eyes bright with trust. The real adventure was only just beginning. Hagrid hummed softly as he gripped a dead chicken by the neck, letting its blood run into the waiting basin. Feathers scattered through the air like snowflakes. From his perch by the window, Harry Potter watched quietly and thought about how easily Hagrid's rough exterior could fool the unwary. To the casual visitor, Hagrid's hut always looked as if it were on the brink of collapse. Piles of unicorn tail hair here, stacks of cured ham there. But Harry knew better. Beneath all that clutter, Hagrid kept everything surprisingly neat. Today, however, the place was in genuine disarray. Droppings from the dragon in the corner, overturned jars, plates smeared with greasy residue, and Hagrid didn't seem to care in the least. Harry realized, with a sinking heart, that sending Norberta away would be far harder than he'd imagined. He didn't know the whole story. How, in the original timeline, Hagrid had vowed never to give up this little dragon. If Malfoy hadn't spotted Norberta in Diagon Alley, Hagrid would have kept her for himself forever. After all, he once raised a 3-headed dog, far more dangerous than a baby dragon, and in Hagrid's eyes, a Norwegian Ridgeback was no more than another oversized, toothy pet. Harry closed his eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. He had always admired Hagrid's fierce loyalty to his beasts. Now, more than ever, he understood why persuading his friend to part with Norberta would be a delicate and emotional task. Hagrid hesitated. He could always move Norberta out to the Forbidden Forest. After all, he'd done the same with Aragog the giant spider and even his half-brother Grop. But he wasn't about to be careless. He'd learned his lesson when Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, turned up in his care because some Greek wizard had lost him in a card game. That was exactly why he hadn't suspected the stranger who slipped him the dragon egg in the first place. Harry and Draco exchanged a look. Draco stepped forward first. "Hagrid," he began softly, "do you really want Norberta living in this hut forever? What if you hide her in the forest and she bolts out? She could easily hurt someone, maybe even bite their neck." Draco flexed his fingers for emphasis. "That kind of trouble would fall right back on Dumbledore." Ron nodded, wincing as he rubbed his swollen right hand. "Why not send her to Charlie? He knows how to raise dragons. She'd grow up with her own kind, instead of being stuck here all alone." Hagrid's eyes filled. Harry stepped up beside Ron, determined. "I know we can't keep her forever," he said urgently, "but please, just a little more time. My little princess, Norberta." He reached out as if to cradle the dragon in his arms. For a moment, Hagrid looked as though he might give in. Then he drew a deep breath, steeling himself to do what was best for Norberta, no matter how much it hurt. "Where's her mother?" Draco Malfoy demanded, stepping closer. Hagrid shook his head, eyes glistening. Harry and the others stood firm, refusing to back down. "All right," Hagrid sighed, blinking rapidly. "You can write to Charlie if you like. But now, off you go." He pointed them toward the path back to the castle. Then, voice wavering, he turned on Draco. "And you, little Malfoy brat, leave Norberta to me. Don't you set foot here again until Charlie writes." Tears brimmed in Hagrid's eyes as he stamped his foot and shooed them away, mercifully refusing to say Draco's name one more time. Harry, Draco, and the rest trudged back to Hogwarts, heads down. None of them saw Ryan, pale and silent, hovering like a ghost over the tiny dragon in Hagrid's arms. In truth, Ryan understood why Harry had kept Norberta's secret. After all, Harry knew Ryan already guessed the truth about the Philosopher's Stone and the three-headed dog, and figured there was no use hiding another secret. Harry must have assumed Ryan would try to seize the stone himself. But understanding didn't make Ryan any less furious. That very morning, as Harry crept toward the forest, Ryan had deliberately muttered in his sleep to scare them in the dark. And under Dumbledore's plan, Ryan had been ready to intercept Quirrell once the professor struck at the unicorn, only to have the attack come too soon, thwarting everything he'd prepared. Now, hovering over the dragon, Ryan clenched his fists. He might know why Harry had lied, but that didn't mean he was going to forgive him anytime soon. Ryan decided to wait until Professor Quirrell had left before rescuing the unicorn. He knew he had the power to do it at his leisure. And, just as in the original timeline, Harry would confront the now empowered Quirrell after drinking the unicorn's blood. Ryan was convinced that Harry could handle such a battle, at least in theory. While he was at it, he intended to seize the Philosopher's Stone too, both to hinder Quirrell's plans and to get revenge on Dumbledore for undercutting his potion sales, before Quirrell even had a chance to break into the restricted section. Chapter 176. The Harry Trio Captured. Over the next few days, Harry settled back into an almost normal, worry-free routine. The one thing tugging at his thoughts was the upcoming Quidditch match, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. On the opposing team were his friends, Seamus and Dean from Gryffindor, as well as Ron's older brothers, not to mention the Weasley twins, who both flew as chasers under his own captaincy. It was a curious mix of camaraderie and rivalry, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. A victory would propel Ravenclaw into first place and finally end the team's century-long wait for the Quidditch Silver Cup. So critical was this game that Captain Johnny had even postponed finalizing next year's squad. After all, 4 of his top players, including himself, were 7th years on the brink of graduation. Yet Johnny believed that securing the Silver Cup was worth more than early roster decisions. This match was his last chance to shine in school competition. A win could transform his passion into a profession, opening doors to a future in professional Quidditch. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy was consumed by a different concern, repairing his fractured relationship with Hagrid. While Harry focused on flying high, Draco quietly plotted a more personal reconciliation, one that might prove even more challenging than any match on the Quidditch pitch. Since the incident with Norberta, Hagrid has flatly forbidden Harry, Ron, and Hermione from coming anywhere near his cabin. He's worried that if Charlie's reply ever arrives, asking after the dragon, they'll find out and send Norberta back to Romania. On top of that, he was still smarting from Harry and the others barging in uninvited. The only exception was Draco. Because he impressed Hagrid with his detailed knowledge of dragon care, Hagrid let Draco stand guard by the enclosure. Ron took this personally. Every chance he got, he'd hunt Hagrid down and proudly display his battle wounds, his hand black and blue from Norberta's bite. Hermione, too, wasn't spared. Her tail had been grazed, and she would gingerly show off her own bruises. Ron never missed an opportunity to remind Hagrid of all the danger they'd endured for the dragon's sake. Things finally came to a head during Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall noticed Ron's swollen, sore hand and immediately ordered him to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey barely glanced at him. She was a Slytherin alumna, cold and uncurious, and simply muttered that he was hurt before sending him on his way. In the original timeline, Harry and Ron's insistence on speaking to a petrified Hermione had brought McGonagall to tears. Pomfrey, by contrast, declared it a waste of time to speak to someone turned to stone. Meanwhile, Professor Quirrell was quietly setting his own plans into motion. Night after night he ventured into the forest, determined to subdue that unicorn on his own. But the creature's magic was simply too strong. Each time he failed, he had no choice but to reluctantly gather rare herbs and brew his potion by moonlight. 4 days later, Hedwig at last arrived with a letter addressed to Ron, though, of course, she delivered it to Harry. Dear Ron, I hope you're well. We mustn't be seen illegally transporting a dragon. Can you bring a ridgeback up to the tallest tower at midnight this Saturday? Let me know as soon as possible. Love, Charlie. On the surface, the note seemed perfectly ordinary. Nothing about it would strike Harry as odd. But to Ryan, the request was fraught with red flags. Why rendezvous at the highest tower instead of Hagrid's hut? And how could anyone sneak into Hogwarts so freely, without the headmaster's permission? In the original timeline, this message would have reached Harry a full week later. Now it had arrived 4 days early. The implication was clear. Dumbledore must be aware of Charlie's clandestine dragon work, and even in league with him, while Professor McGonagall remained completely in the dark. Everything pointed to a deliberate setup, almost to the point of getting everyone arrested. Simp lied to maneuver Harry into Voldemort's presence and test whether the Dark Lord already knew that Harry himself was a Horcrux. Harry ran through the chain of events in his mind, trying to pinpoint exactly why Dumbledore's reply had reached him so much faster than expected. In the original timeline, Professor Quirrell had already fallen completely under Voldemort's control, so completely, in fact, that he slaughtered a unicorn for its blood to strengthen the Dark Lord's temporary body. Dumbledore noticed the vanished unicorn and, alarmed by the brutality, set his plan in motion only after a full week of fruitless searching. But this wasn't the original timeline. Here, Quirrell was still reeling from Harry's 2 earlier confrontations and the sting of those cheaply brewed potions he'd fed himself in an effort to stay a step ahead of Voldemort's spirit. He hadn't dared approach the unicorn herd, not yet, so there hadn't been a sudden killing for Dumbledore to discover. Instead, Dumbledore's suspicions flared at the slightest hint of Quirrell's odd behavior in class, and he moved swiftly, far faster than in the world Harry remembered. Meanwhile, Hagrid had been entirely distracted by Norbert, his precious Norwegian ridgeback hatchling, and hadn't noticed anything amiss in the Forbidden Forest. It wasn't until later, when innocent creatures had already come to harm, that he finally raised the alarm. By then, Dumbledore had quietly enlisted Charlie Weasley's help and dispatched his letter to Harry. That old fox of a headmaster. He'd already set every piece on the board. Harry clenched his jaw. If Dumbledore was this far ahead already, he'd need to be ready for anything. I'd better start preparing, Harry thought, steeling himself for whatever came next. Ryan grinned to himself. Stealing the Sorcerer's Stone might be straightforward enough, but truly intimidating Dumbledore and keeping Harry Potter in line at the same time was a much tougher challenge. By the time the clock struck midnight on Saturday, Ryan was already shadowing Harry and his friends through the silent corridors of Hogwarts. He'd seen how they'd been caught in the original timeline, not because of Draco Malfoy's tattling or Neville Longbottom's well-meaning warning, but simply because they'd forgotten to bring the invisibility cloak. This time, he wondered, what fresh excuse would Dumbledore concoct to have them hauled off? Damn, Ryan thought. Dumbledore had beaten him to the punch. With a wry smile, he recalled how he'd slipped into Professor McGonagall's study on the castle's 2nd floor just minutes before. She'd been woken from an afternoon nap and barely had time to straighten her robes when he leaned in with his whispered report. I spotted a young wizard loitering around the astronomy tower. He looked as if he meant to leave Hogwarts under cover of night. That was all it took. A simple, half-true rumor, and McGonagall was off in a hurry, sure that she must protect the castle from unauthorized departures. Ryan's plan was elegant in its simplicity. The fewer the moving parts, the fewer the chances for error. As he trailed behind the unsuspecting trio, he allowed himself a quiet chuckle. If this was his greatest trick yet, it was also the easiest. Ryan never expected Dumbledore to retreat, only to reappear moments later. Whatever the headmaster's plan, he timed it perfectly. Just after Harry, Ron, and Draco had seen Norberta safely on her way, Dumbledore materialized out of thin air beside them and murmured a subtle jinx. In an instant, the trio's memories of the invisibility cloak slipped away, and they descended the grand staircase as if they'd never been hidden. It wasn't that Harry and his friends lacked skill. Facing Dumbledore's mastery of spatial magic was like bringing a broomstick to a Gundam battle. No matter how cautiously they moved, his instantaneous teleportation charm made escape impossible. Before they could gather their wits, Professor McGonagall appeared at the foot of the stairs, clad in a tartan dressing gown and a neat hairnet. "With me, please," she said in a calm tone that crackled with barely contained anger. Harry felt the weight of her disappointment more sharply than any scolding. They followed her in silence up to the second-floor study. Inside, McGonagall closed the door behind them. Ron trembled so violently his knees buckled and his face burned crimson. Draco's complexion was as pale as the Bloody Baron's ghost. Professor McGonagall stood behind her desk, arms folded. "I can hardly believe the three of you," she began, her voice deadly calm. "Mr. Filch reported you vanished toward the astronomy tower. Might I remind you that it's well past 1 in the morning? Explain yourselves." Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the hush of the corridor, sharp and unyielding. Harry's heart thudded in his chest, but when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. Beside him, Ron and Hermione exchanged worried glances, their eyes glued to the worn stone beneath their feet. "I thought you might be different from your father," McGonagall continued, her disappointment plain in the hard line of her lips, "or at the very least more like your mother. Clearly, I was wrong." Still no one spoke. McGonagall drew in a long breath through her pointed nose, the exhale trembling with restrained anger. "Very well," she said at last. "If you have nothing to say, then the matter is settled." She tapped her wand against her palm. 20 points from Gryffindor for each of you, and all 3 of you will serve detention." "Professor, please," Harry managed to whisper, but his plea fell flat. "You'll have plenty of time to speak tomorrow evening," McGonagall replied coolly. "Now off to bed. We'll sort out the rest at detention." With that, she swept away, leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione to trudge back to Gryffindor Tower in silence, the sting of lost points and the dread of detention heavy on their shoulders. Chapter 177. Magical Development. Harry felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as though he'd somehow slipped back into life at the Dursleys. Rita Skeeter's scathing article hadn't unsettled him this much, but forgetting the invisibility cloak, he staggered over the thought. It was one of the Deathly Hallows, his father's most treasured heirloom, and he'd left it behind in the astronomy tower. If it slipped into the wrong hands, or vanished entirely, what would he do? Ron was fretting over how his parents might hear the news. Percy, he knew, would lecture them all on the sanctity of rules and procedure. Draco, by contrast, looked almost unbothered, except for the quiet ache in his eyes whenever he thought of Norberta. In his attachment to the dragon, Draco was as devoted as Hagrid himself. But unlike Hagrid, he'd spent years learning to lock his emotions away, channeling that steel into his well-known sharp tongue. It was this same stony reserve that had kept the 3 of them almost silent on their trek back to the dormitories under Filch's watchful glare the night before. Finally, Harry shook his head to clear away thoughts of the cloak. Another annoyance surfaced: the point deductions. Draco had cost Slytherin 20 points, which was bad enough, but Harry and Ron had lost a combined 40. No wonder Draco had seemed oddly cheerful in comparison. He swallowed, bracing himself for the fallout that would follow when they realized what had really gone missing. Fortunately, the Slytherin common room lay deep in the dungeons, so Draco had managed to shake off Filch long before they ever reached the entrance, sparing them his suspicious glances and endless chatter. By the time Harry and Ron crept back into the dormitory, everyone else was fast asleep. So deep, in fact, that even the arrival of 2 extra bodies in the room didn't stir a single groan. Harry, however, found sleep impossible. He stared at the dark ceiling, replaying every moment of the night's adventure. What would happen when the Ravenclaws discovered what they'd done? Would the other Quidditch players still see him as the future captain, or would they begin to doubt his judgment? On the other hand, if rumors spread, at least he'd be freed from the burden of secrecy. Everyone would know what he was capable of. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Beside him, Ron was already snoring softly, completely surrendered to slumber. Harry envied him that gift. How could someone as thick-skinned as Ron end up in Ravenclaw? Draco's teasing words echoed in his mind, and despite himself, Harry let out a quiet chuckle. Eventually, exhaustion won out and he drifted off. The next morning, as Ravenclaw students filed past the great hourglass in the corridor, its silver beads marking each house's points, they sensed something was wrong. The droplets in the Ravenclaw glass had shifted overnight, and not in the way they remembered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Last night's surprises weren't over yet. News of a sudden 40-point plunge in Gryffindor's total swept through Hogwarts by lunchtime. Yet nobody seemed all that worried about the missing points. What set tongues wagging was the revelation behind those lost points. Harry Potter himself, the celebrated hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had been hauled before the headmaster, not alone but in the company of 2 other first years. In the bustling corridors and sunlit courtyards, students exchanged eager whispers. Who were these mysterious companions? Had Draco Malfoy been implicated? Was Ron Weasley involved? And what about Neville Longbottom? Did he share in Harry's misfortune? The air hummed with speculation far more fervent than any discussion of house standings. Even Harry found the turn of events surprising. It wasn't the point deduction that preoccupied his classmates. It was the scandal of seeing the boy who lived led off in handcuffs. Murmurs suggested jealousy. Others claimed it was another publicity stunt. Some went so far as to resurrect Rita Skeeter's old exposé hinting at Harry's expulsion. Once the most admired student at Hogwarts, Harry had weathered both adulation and suspicion in equal measure. In recent weeks, he drifted from the center of attention, surrounded by a small circle of close friends instead. Now, whether he liked it or not, he was being thrust back into the spotlight. And if all the gossip was any indication, Ron Weasley was enjoying a resurgence of his own early-term popularity. Between Phoenix sightings and point penalties, life at Hogwarts had never been more entertaining. Ron was the first to draw everyone's attention. After all, everyone had assumed that if you worked hard, you'd earn one of those coveted Doraemon gold cards. But once they saw Ron's performance, any hope of that vanished. Rita Skeeter's brief write-up had made him famous for a hot minute, but the buzz died just as quickly, and Ron slipped right back into obscurity. He'd been waiting for this chance in silence. Determined to reclaim the spotlight, Ron resolved to become Hogwarts' next big sensation. Under Harry's astonished gaze, he began weaving one tall tale after another, sharing each version with anyone who would listen. In Ron's latest yarn, he'd unearthed the long-missing Ravenclaw Tower Phoenix, which had secretly been living in the Astronomy Tower all these years. It survived only with the help of some invisible magical creature Ron wouldn't or couldn't describe in detail. According to Ron, the reason nobody had seen the bird was because a band of poachers, hidden among the senior Slytherins, had been keeping it out of sight. So dangerous was this conspiracy that the Astronomy Tower had been off-limits during extracurricular hours. And just when it seemed the poachers were about to carry out their master plan, Ron claimed that he, aided by his strategic consultant Draco Malfoy and Harry himself, had exposed the plot, thwarted the ringleaders, and sent them packing. As each new listener gasped in delight, Ron beamed, confident that this time, fame at Hogwarts was finally within his grasp. Professor McGonagall sighed as she recalled the rumors swirling around the Astronomy Tower incident. The greatest frustration, she thought, was that nobody ever uncovered the true identity of the mastermind behind it all. In the end, someone talked, and McGonagall herself had hauled the culprit in. Every retelling of the tale was broadly the same. The only real variation was how prominently Ron figured in it. At Harry's insistence, one detail was dutifully added to the official account. By the time the story closed, the Phoenix and the mysterious invisible creature were long gone from the tower, so no one would wander up there hoping to stumble on the invisibility cloak. Even this version of events made its way back to McGonagall. Honestly, she muttered one afternoon in Transfiguration, I can't fathom why anyone believes this nonsense. A young Hufflepuff, whom everyone half-jokingly called the Little Badger, spoke up. Professor, Potter and the others were only caught because Dumbledore thought someone was prowling around the Astronomy Tower late at night. He knew you often stayed behind after hours, so he asked you to check on things. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. That story, that the mastermind himself reported them, is preposterous, she snapped. Another student ventured, but do we even know why they went up there in the first place? They wouldn't say, McGonagall admitted, sounding more annoyed than ever. And between you and me, I've started to wonder if Dumbledore was hiding something more, perhaps the true secret of the Phoenix. After all, the headmaster does have a Phoenix of his own. Professor McGonagall's sharp voice cut through the rising argument in the corridor. 10 points from Hufflepuff for inciting a quarrel. With that, she turned on her heel and swept away, leaving an uneasy silence in her wake. The spat about actions unworthy of one's standing died instantly under her stern glare. Ordinarily, whispers of a boy's love triangle wouldn't rouse much interest at Hogwarts, but once the tale began to involve a phoenix and an invisible beast, it captured everyone's imagination. By the following morning, the story had grown so elaborate that students claimed Ron's right hand was swollen from an injury in the supposed scuffle, and even that Hagrid's hut had been locked against visitors while its owner wept over the loss of his beloved creatures. As everyone knows, Hagrid adores magical beasts, and the idea that his phoenix or some unseen creature had vanished left him heartbroken. Word of his tears spread quickly, painting him as a tragic figure, and, by extension, casting a shadow over Harry's own reputation. His friendship with Fawkes, the majestic phoenix, and that mysterious invisible creature suddenly seemed scandalous rather than heroic. Meanwhile, a handful of thrill-seeking students decided to break into the astronomy tower under cover of night. They hadn't reckoned on Filch's newfound vigilance. He was posted at the base of the staircase, ready to snatch points from any would-be trespassers. Caught up in these rumors and Filch's watchful eye, Harry found himself with no opportunity to slip away and reclaim his invisibility cloak. Each time he considered sneaking back to the trunk where it lay hidden, a new distraction, or the threat of another house point penalty, pulled him back into the fray. So Harry paced the castle's shadowed passages, torn between clearing his name and retrieving the one artifact that might keep him safe. With Hagrid grieving, Filch prowling and gossip swirling faster than a golden snitch, he had never felt more cornered at Hogwarts. Ryan threw himself into his studies and Quidditch practice, but he couldn't entirely block out the rest of the castle. Every so often, he found his gaze drifting up to the astronomy tower. It was only a brief, almost unconscious gesture, but it was enough to give Ron's wild tale the impression of truth. Sure enough, Rita Skeeter snatched onto it in her latest Daily Prophet article. She rails against Hogwarts for encouraging students to become magical creature hunters, conveniently omitting the crucial fact that the whole stunt was a Slytherin student's doing. Instead, she heaps suspicion on several high-achieving Muggle-born seniors, young magizoologists with nothing but sterling records. The story has taken on a life of its own, growing more outlandish with every retelling. Ryan never imagined it would snowball like this, and he still can't decide whether to laugh or pull his hair out. Chapter 178. Hagrid Doesn't Play by the Rules. The next morning at breakfast, Harry, Ron, and Draco each found an identical parchment slipped beneath their plates. In neat, severe handwriting it read, "Your confinement begins at 11 tonight. Report to Mr. Filch in the foyer. Professor McGonagall." Ron poked at his omelette in frustration. "I thought this whole thing was supposed to be sorted out by Professor Flitwick, or even Snape. Flitwick's always been lenient, and Snape's never held anything against his own house, especially Harry. So why has McGonagall stepped in?" Draco Malfoy drifted over, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, his sneer cutting into Ron's indignation. "Weasley, did your tall tale fail to convince McGonagall that you're truly sorry? Looks like she's decided to up the punishment instead." Harry felt his face go pale. He'd never been summoned to Filch's lair this late, and he had a sinking suspicion Draco was right. At least Ron's quick thinking had one silver lining. Earlier that morning, Ron had slipped away to the astronomy tower and arranged for Charlie and Bill to fetch the invisibility cloak. That little escapade also kept everyone from prying into the rumors swirling about Harry and Ron's so-called romantic entanglements. As they finished their breakfast in uneasy silence, Harry glanced at the hourglass by Professor McGonagall's portrait and steeled himself. 11 o'clock would come all too soon, and this time, he suspected, there would be no friendly heads to smooth the blow. At 11 o'clock that night, they bade Ryan and the others farewell in the Gryffindor common room and made their way down to the foyer. Waiting by the entrance were Argus Filch and Draco Malfoy. Without a word, Filch snapped, "Follow me," struck a match, and lit a battered lantern. He led them out into the chill night air. They crossed the dew-damp lawn in silence until Filch, squinting at their anxious faces, broke in with a low, menacing growl. "You'd be wise to think twice before breaking school rules again," he warned. His voice was grimmer and more explicit than the idle threats he'd muttered when he first caught them trespassing. He spoke longingly of ancient punishments, hoisting offenders by their wrists from the ceiling beams for days on end, and confessed he still kept his iron chains in the office, oiled and ready for use. Draco, unconcerned, strode alongside as if on a casual evening stroll. After all, he reminded himself, he was the son of the school's director, surely beyond Filch's crude retribution. Ron, however, shuffled his feet and clung to Harry's arm, his boots scuffing nervously on the grass. Harry cast a wary glance around the dark field, wondering what sort of punishment could require this midnight procession. "You little brats, I'm talking here," Filch spun on Ron. "And you, Weasley, if you're still daydreaming about love, get your hands off him." "We're not here to flirt," Filch barked. "We're here to be punished." To Harry's astonishment, Filch sounded as if he'd swallowed every word of Rita's salacious rumors. Harry, Ron, and Draco exchanged awkward glances. Detention was already dragging on, and time felt impossibly slow. A tense silence fell. Harry's mind, normally buzzing with theories, went blank. Ron stopped trembling and straightened up, no longer leaning against Harry. Filch noticed the change and mistook it for readiness. "That's better," he said, sounding almost pleased, and led the way down the corridor. Outside, the moon shone brightly, but drifting clouds masked its light, casting them into sudden pockets of darkness. Up ahead, warm lamplight glowed through the windows of Hagrid's hut at the edge of the forest. A familiar gruff voice called out, echoing off the stone walls. "Filch, is that you? Wait up, I'm tagging along." Hagrid's presence was like a promise of safety. Relief and a spark of excitement washed over the three boys. With Hagrid by their side, this might just turn out to be the strangest detention of their lives. Argus Filch prowled along the core, Idor, his beady eyes flitting over their faces with malicious delight. "You probably thought you'd have a fun evening off with that dolt, didn't you?" He sneered at the group of Gryffindors. "Well, think again, you little rascals. Tonight's special outing is a visit to the Forbidden Forest. If any of you make it back in one piece, I'll eat my hat." Draco Malfoy stopped short. "The Forbidden Forest?" he repeated, brow arched. "Is it really as dangerous as that troll Harry and I took down last month?" The memory of that triumph had bolstered Draco's confidence. As the son of Hogwarts' headmaster, he wasn't about to let a little, big forest scare him. Ron Weasley pursed his lips. "Is it the same woods Fred and George always sneak off to?" Harry Potter merely cracked a grin. "As long as Hagrid's with us, I'm not worried. It's detention, not a death sentence." Filch's lip curled in disgust. "Don't be fools. This is the Forbidden Forest, full of all kinds of creatures, werewolves among them." A low rumble of footsteps echoed from the shadows, and Rubus Hagrid emerged carrying his massive crossbow, a quiver of arrows slung across one broad shoulder. His boarhound, Fang, padded faithfully at his heels, head low but ears pricked. The students exchanged uneasy looks as Hagrid approached, his enormous frame filling the corridor's dim light. Tonight, the forest wouldn't know what hit it. "You old caretaker," Hagrid teased, grinning from ear to ear. "Trying to scare them won't work. Those three aren't the sort who back down at the first warning." Filch's face went stony. "I'm only trying to teach them how dangerous the Forbidden Forest really is, so they don't get themselves killed." With that, he turned on his heel, eyes flashing in indignation, and stalked away. Hagrid's smile faded, replaced by concern. "Harry, Ron, Draco, you're here on my account. How about you wait in my hut while I venture into the forest myself to see what's going on?" From the edge of the clearing, Dumbledore raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't expected Hagrid to volunteer. True, it had been Dumbledore's own suggestion, but he'd assumed someone else would go in his stead. In any case, the headmaster was there to oversee everything, and nothing could happen without his knowledge. Hidden behind a cluster of trees, Ryan simply nodded. In the original timeline, Hagrid had never offered such an arrangement while Draco was present, too wary of what Malfoy might report. Harry shook his head. "Thanks, Hagrid, but detention's detention. We're not getting any special favors." Ron, however, looked far too excited to stay put. "Come on, Fred and George have been going on about how brave they were in the forest. There's no way I'm going to let them have all the fun." Hagrid sighed and ruffled their hair. "All right, then. Just be careful, and try not to wander off again." With that, the trio set off toward the hut, while Hagrid lingered a moment longer, staring at the shadowy line of trees beyond. "Both of you are going? I can't just sit this out," Draco declared, stepping forward with quiet resolve. Hagrid held up his lantern. "All right, listen carefully. What we're about to do is extremely dangerous, and I don't want anyone getting hurt. Stick close to me." With that, he led them to the very edge of the Forbidden Forest. The feeble lantern light barely cut through the trees. Hagrid pointed to a narrow, winding path that vanished into the darkness. A chill breeze rustled the undergrowth, and the trio peered into the inky depths. "See that gleam on the ground?" Hagrid whispered. "That silvery sheen is unicorn blood. One of the forest's unicorns has been badly wounded. This is the third such attack in just a week. Last Wednesday, Filch, or was it Professor Sprout, reported something's been stalking the unicorns, but hasn't managed to kill, yet. We have to find the creature before it bleeds out, and if it's suffering too much, we'll need to end its agony humanely." Draco frowned, glancing back at Ron and Hermione. "But what if the thing that did this NDS us first? Unicorns aren't as lumbering as trolls. They're among the most powerful magical beasts. Ollivander uses their hair for wand cores after dragons and phoenixes. A wounded unicorn is dangerous in its own right." Hagrid nodded gravely. I know. That's why we must be careful. Stick together, move quietly, and do exactly as I say." Draco squared his shoulders. "Understood, but I won't stand by while an innocent creature suffers." Hermione placed a steadying hand on his arm. "We'll be with you every step of the way." Taking a final breath, the trio stepped off the beaten path and into the rumbling hush of the Forbidden Forest, determined to find the injured unicorn before darkness closed in around them. Hagrid brushed a clump of grass from his coat and addressed the group in his deep, gravelly voice. "I really don't recommend you all going together. Why don't you stay inside with Fang? There's plenty of food and drink, and you'll be safer by the fire." He cast a stern look around the clearing. "But if you insist on coming, stick close to me." After the dragon egg's last trick, he was determined not to divide the party into separate teams this time. No more splitting up. High above the treetops, Ryan hovered on a cushion of air, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Let's see how Dumbledore's plan holds up now," he thought with quiet amusement. Chapter 179, The Expanding Field. It was 11:30 in the Forbidden Forest. Ryan hovered invisibly above the others, a silent conduit of raw magic. Countless motes of power, shimmering like distant stars, flowed outward from him in a ceaseless torrent. He felt like a scientific white hole, endlessly dispensing energy and matter into the world around him. Magic, once dismissed as a flawed perpetual motion, now revealed its true potential through him. Under Ryan's unseen influence, every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig, even the traveler's thoughts drifted in the direction he willed. Unbeknownst to anyone present, the ethereal realm of the moon's phantom was bleeding into the Forbidden Forest, its boundaries dissolving as Ryan's power reshaped reality itself. Nearby, Dumbledore gripped the Elder Wand, one of the Deathly Hallows, but the legendary instrument lay inert in his hand, more relic than weapon. Ryan's intuition told him it posed no threat. The Archwizard, partially concealed behind Harry and the others, felt a flicker of unease. Whispered echoes of Grindelwald's almost prophetic visions had invaded his mind, tugging at the fringes of his calm. Yet Ryan, exercising prudent restraint, confined his domain just enough to spare Dumbledore's life. A wise precaution, since the moon's phantom still ranked a formidable level 7 force. And so, at the heart of the Forbidden Forest, two unseen powers intertwined, one celestial, one ancient, each waiting to see who would bend to the other's will. Dumbledore felt a ripple of unease, but only for a moment, before he steeled himself and sent his thoughts to Hagrid and the others. Voldemort, with his soul torn apart, had in fact become all but immortal, though he remained blissfully unaware of his true state. His mastery of dark magic and the destructive force at his command had only grown. Even Dumbledore, armed with the Elder Wand, could at best match him. Yet Voldemort's glaring vulnerability lay in his endless cycle of rebirth. So long as his wounds weren't utterly fatal, he would simply reconstitute himself, making him virtually invincible to all but the most powerful sorcerers. Only those who had attained, or nearly attained, seventh circle magic could hope to stand against him. Ryan was one such wizard. Gathering threads of starlight into his cupped hands, he wove them into shape until a noble steed of shimmering silver stood before them. The creature alighted on the ground with a quiet grace. No expert in magical beasts would have mistaken it for a living unicorn. It was a masterful conjuration, a pure construct of arcane energy. As Voldemort inhaled the sudden surge of untainted magic, a flicker of recognition passed through him. At the same time, Hagrid, Hermione, and the others, having followed the illusory blood trail, crept forward, their wands at the ready, unaware of the true power Ryan had just unleashed. Ryan had intended to watch Dumbledore's plan unfold, but the moment he glimpsed the injured unicorn, he abandoned that resolve. Sympathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. Emotions made you weak. And in battle, weakness got you killed. He reminded himself why wizards had risen to power in the first place. Compared to magical beasts, a wizard's natural defenses were negligible. Their strength lay entirely in the slender piece of wood they called a wand. Remove the wand, and even the most seasoned Auror was no more capable than a street performer in Ouagadougou, Africa, spinning tricks with elaborate gestures but no real power. Yet that same wand had given wizards dominion over the world of magic. Now, deep in the Forbidden Forest, Lord Voldemort, speaking through Professor Quirrell, was about to demonstrate those powers in their purest, most terrifying form. The unicorn before them was only an illusion, yet its agony felt real. It let out a high, piercing shriek as rivulets of silver-white blood arced through the air like shooting stars. Oddly, most of that luminous fluid drifted back, reabsorbing into the creature's body, as if it were alive. Without casting any extra sensor, eye or detection spells, Voldemort cared little for sleight-of-mind tricks. Quirrell raised his wand. The unicorn dissolved into a swirl of microscopic lights, each one homing in on Quirrell's trembling form. The forest fell silent, the tension so thick Ryan could almost taste it. Here was the stark truth of dark magic. Subtlety over spectacle, precision over power. And Ryan knew, better than anyone, that once you opened your heart to compassion, you were already trapped. Even as Professor Flitwick tracked every flick and twirl of the unicorn's hooves, his body simply couldn't keep pace. He didn't even raise a single shield charm, no armor spell, no protego, to blunt Lord Voldemort's assault. Confronted by a barrage of curses hurled in blinding succession, even Flitwick's legendary defenses would have crumbled within seconds. But Voldemort had no interest in tearing the unicorn apart or defiling its blood with crude black magic. His design was far more perverse. He intended to siphon its pure life force, bind the lethal enchantment into Professor Quirrell's borrowed body, and shatter that fragile vessel from the inside. Softly, almost reverently, he wove an ancient, merciless incantation that sealed the unicorn's wound so perfectly not a drop of its iridescent blood could spill. It was as if he stood in a twisted kitchen, pickling the very essence of magic for his dark feast. Among all enchanted creatures, only the phoenix approaches the unicorn in singular power, and even the phoenix's flame remains a single element. Wizardry, by contrast, is the ultimate master key. No matter how formidable the lock, a skilled witch or wizard can fashion their spells to fit its wards, pry it open, and leave nothing unmade behind. From Ryan's vantage point, it was eerie to watch the unicorn's radiant, light-infused form slip into a kind of quagmire each time it neared Quirrell, now fully bound to Voldemort's will. The instant its silvery glow brushed him, the creature would snap back into its solid body, and the old wound on its neck would fissure open all over again. Meanwhile, Quirrell himself bobbed like a ball caught in an undercurrent. No matter how frantically some unseen force tugged at him from beneath, it could never quite latch on. The trick at work here is the same one that allows the night bus to swerve seamlessly around London's traffic, steering clear of obstacles without a single abrasive scrape. In theory, any magical being of a single, uniform nature can be manipulated this way, provided the caster's skill is high enough. That's why the Ministry of Magic sorts creatures by danger level. The more dangerous the beast, the tougher it is to subject it to such subtle magical control. Only wizards of Voldemort's caliber can bend thunderbirds, unicorns, or dragons to their will with these techniques. Three-headed dogs, however, are a different matter. Their mixed magical heritage makes them immune to that sort of taming, which explains why Voldemort, unable to manipulate Fluffy directly, resorted to enlisting Hagrid's help to slip past the monstrous guard. The unicorn's roar echoed through the chamber for 5 long minutes, its body trembling with exhaustion. Its horn, once blazing with pure light, flickered and died out. Summoning its last strength, the creature reared up and drove its sharp horn into the forehead of the man it had been fighting, Quirrell, the puppet host to Lord Voldemort. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Hope gleamed in the unicorn's silver eyes as it poured its healing magic into Quirrell's wounds. But then, with a choking gurgle, the spell abruptly cut out. The unicorn staggered, its veins swollen, and its great body shuddered. A fountain of silvery blood spurted from its side, arcing through the air to fill Quirrell's agape mouth. The beast collapsed, its final breath lost in a whisper. Deep in the Forbidden Forest, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid pressed on under a canopy so thick that daylight scarcely filtered through. For nearly half an hour they walked, the narrow track winding ever deeper into tangled undergrowth. Broken branches scraped at their robes, and the ground grew slick with mud and blood. Dark crimson stains fanned out around gnarled roots, as though some wounded creature had thrashed there just moments before. Harry swallowed, heart pounding. That much blood, it can't be anything good. Hagrid's great frame came to an abrupt halt. He raised a hand, silencing Harry and the others. Through a tangle of ancient oak branches, he pointed ahead. "Look," he breathed. In a small clearing beyond, something pure white lay illuminated by a single shaft of moonlight. It glowed faintly against the dark forest floor, drawing every eye toward it. Hagrid held up a hand, signaling Harry and the others to stay back. Stepping forward with deliberate care, he entered a small clearing in the trees and froze. Before him lay a unicorn, dead. Its slender legs were splayed at odd angles, its pearly white mane fanned across the damp hull as dark leaves, like spilled silk. The creature's flanks were unnaturally sunken, its coat dull and dry. Almost every drop of its blood had been drawn out. Harry felt a chill as he caught sight of the wound in the unicorn's side. Hagrid crouched beside the corpse, his face ashen. "My poor girl," he whispered. Then Hagrid's eyes narrowed. At the edge of the clearing, concealed by brambles, crouched a hooded figure. It moved with a predatory stillness, pressing its lips to the unicorn's wound and drinking deeply. Not a sound betrayed its presence, only the faint rustle of leaves underfoot. Harry raised his wand. Hagrid shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Don't," he cautioned in a quiet growl. Harry froze, palming the wand. All around them the forest seemed to hold its breath as the grim ritual continued. The hooded stranger finally straightened and turned, its eyes glinting beneath the cowl. Hagrid drew his own wand. Harry swallowed hard, ready for whatever came next. Author's note: many thanks to Hanhai Wujiang for your generous support and to everyone who's recommended and subscribed. Your encouragement keeps the story alive. Chapter 180, Voldemort. They say that even the most timid dog will summon courage in the presence of its master. That's why dogs lean so wholly on their master's strength. Unicorns, too, draw power from their innate magic. Yet this dreadful display left Yaya, the unicorn, frozen in place, unable even to lift her hindquarters. Harry and his companions exchanged tense glances. They all knew how formidable a unicorn could be, but the black-robed wizard before them was on another level, overwhelmingly powerful, even in his half-crippled condition. They had badly misjudged Voldemort's mastery of magic and the unicorn's dependence on it. Against a dragon, even a weakened Voldemort would face a far fiercer opponent. Its sheer physical might couldn't be subdued by spellwork alone. In the original timeline, A single proud centaur could have driven him from the field, and Hagrid was precisely the kind of ally whose very presence would force Voldemort into the shadows. "Harry, what's wrong?" Draco cried. In an instant, Harry clutched his forehead as a violent tremor shook his entire body. It was Dumbledore who had reinforced the bond between Harry and Voldemort. He had sensed Voldemort's desperate urge to seize control of Quirrell's body and break free. Without the headmaster's intervention, the fragment of Voldemort that had long been Harry's hidden reservoir of power would have stirred at the moment of confrontation, though in a very different form. In plain terms, Harry would have tapped into Voldemort's signature offensive magic, receiving a surge that sharpened his mind, quickened his reflexes, and elevated his combat prowess. And once the link was severed, those boosts would not have vanished outright, but would have been gradually absorbed into Harry himself. Each further clash with Voldemort, and each narrow escape, would have left him stronger still. Instead, blinding agony tore through Harry's head as though his scar had ignited. His vision blurred, and he staggered backward, but Voldemort didn't even seem to notice. He stood over Harry's retreating form, gaze cold and unyielding, as if his foe had become more insubstantial than a ghost, a wisp of black smoke vanishing into the air. Even Dumbledore could hardly suppress a faint, knowing smile. Tom Riddle truly could not conceal his thoughts, or perhaps his particular brand of dark magic was simply ill-suited to hiding them, at least not in the presence of Albus Dumbledore. Deep in the castle's dungeons, Tom lay unconscious, and so did Harry, helpless to bridge the mental link he'd been hoping for. There simply hadn't been an opening to connect with Tom's mind and see what he was planning. But out in the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid proved far more formidable than Tom anticipated. The moment Tom awoke in proximity to Hagrid, he couldn't help but stir, unless he was willing to abandon Quirrell's frail body altogether. When Harry at last forced through the bond, all he sensed was an overwhelming tide of murderous hatred. There was no question now. Tom Riddle had no idea that Harry himself harbored a Horcrux. Yet the true horror lay in what Quirrell had done in his desperation. He'd stooped to drinking unicorn blood, an act so dark that it cost 2 innocent lives. The unicorn, defenseless and pure, was gone, and as Quirrell's body weakened, he too slipped into death. How could anyone be so cruel? Hagrid's voice cracked as he knelt beside the fallen unicorn, stroking its silvery mane with anguished care. Unicorn blood is sacred. Its only power is in its purity. It was meant to heal, not to steal life. Ron peered from behind Hagrid's broad shoulders, one hand shielding his eyes from the grisly sight. "What's so special about unicorn blood?" he asked in a low, horrified whisper. Harry, having steadied his breathing, stepped forward. Draco, ever watchful, slid an arm under Harry's in silent support. Together, they waited for Hagrid's answer, their faces pale in the dim forest light. Hagrid's voice trembled as he spoke. Only someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain would recommit such a monstrous crime. Yes, unicorn blood can stave off death even when you're at death's door, but you pay an awful price. To save your own life, you spill the blood of something pure and defenseless. From the moment that crimson trickles across your lips, you forfeit any claim to a true life. You become half alive, a cursed soul. After that, Hagrid fell silent, his face dark with pain and regret. Neither Harry nor Hermione nor anyone else pressed him further. Instead, they followed his quiet command and set to work digging a shallow grave. When it was ready, they laid the fallen creature gently in the earth, covering it with soil and leaves, and said nothing. Only their heavy hearts whispered farewells. On the walk back to Hogwarts, Ron lagged behind, his breath visible in the chilly night air. "If you're condemned to live out that cursed half-life," he muttered, "wouldn't you rather just die?" Draco Malfoy, walking a few paces ahead, glanced back with a scowl. "I can't imagine any wizard, least of all one with his power, resorting to a method that destroys another life and damns his own. It's madness." The students fell silent again, each lost in thought. The forest around them was still, as if it too mourned the life that had been cut short for the sake of a desperate immortality. And somewhere deep inside, they all wondered whether the cost of living forever was worth the price of one's soul. Harry's eyes were alight with excitement. Unless Quirrell only wants to prolong his own life so he can use something that fully restores energy and magic, something that makes you immortal, the Philosopher's Stone, he said, his voice growing louder with each word. Hagrid, standing just ahead, turned to listen. Voldemort, Harry cried. Ron and Draco both leapt back, faces blanching. We don't say that name, they blurted in unison. Why not? Harry demanded. Who else could it be? Who's been lurking in the shadows for years, waiting for a chance to return? Who's desperately clinging to life, biding his time until an opportunity appears? He jabbed a finger toward Professor Quirrell, looming across the room. You know exactly who I mean. Ron and Draco exchanged terrified looks before whispering together. The Dark Lord. Draco's knees trembled. So Professor Quirrell isn't acting on his own. He's just a puppet. He clung to Ron, voice shaking. He's harboring Voldemort. Ron's eyes went wide. But Fred and George knocked Quirrell out before. They hit him on the back of the head with that bat bogey hex. Harry's face grew grim. Apparently it wasn't enough. Harry jabbed a finger in the air. Dumbledore hid the Philosopher's Stone here at Hogwarts to trap him. He slammed his fist against his palm. But after what we saw today, the half-crippled Voldemort is still unbelievably strong. What's Dumbledore going to do now? Before he could answer his own question, Hagrid's booming voice drifted down the corridor. Harry, Ron, it's nearly 1:30. Move, will ye? Earlier, Hagrid had shepherded Draco back to the Slytherin common room, then guided Harry and Ron to the 6th-floor landing outside Ravenclaw Tower. Inside the dimly lit common room, sleep was the last thing on Harry's mind. He paced before the hearth, hands still trembling, while Ron perched on an armchair, fighting a yawn that threatened to swallow him whole. I knew it all along, Harry muttered. Who else in the wizarding world would dare to break into Gringotts and then sneak into Hogwarts? Who could slay a unicorn, without a scratch, without casting a single spell? Ron's eyes widened. Only Voldemort. Stop saying that name, Harry snapped, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. Ron leaned forward, lowering his voice. Dumbledore's probably holding back because of Quirrell. He won't move against Voldemort, while Quirrell's life hangs in the balance. Harry kicked at the edge of the carpet. But what if he's misjudging him? Voldemort's still that powerful. Harry's voice echoed off the silent walls of the deserted common row. Dumbledore doesn't realize how strong Voldemort has become, he muttered, pacing in restless strides. Ron glanced at him sharply. Can you stop saying that name? Harry whirled to face him. Fine, but I'm stuck here waiting for Quirrell to steal the Philosopher's Stone. If Dumbledore's plan fails and Voldemort comes back, he'll walk right in and kill me. Honestly, you'd think Dumbledore would be thrilled to see me as a sacrifice. He kicked at a loose floorboard in frustration. This is Hogwarts, not a battlefield. Ron softened, resting a hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry, you've got to trust Dumbledore. He's the greatest white wizard of our time, the only one Voldemort ever feared. Harry slumped against a nearby armchair. Maybe you're right, but that doesn't change the fact he misjudged Voldemort's power tonight. Ron nodded. I know, but Hagrid saw it all. He'll tell Dumbledore exactly what happened. Once Albus hears the whole story, he'll understand why we're worried. Outside, the first pale light of dawn inched through the windows. The two friends stood in companionable silence, their throats dry, their eyes heavy. Finally, they trudged back to the dormitory, fell onto their beds, and were swallowed by much-needed sleep.